Did you wanna start saying?
Well, thank you all for coming today and those who have phoned in. On Friday evening, I sent you a copy of the first draft of the form-based code. Eric, Bonnie, Joel, and Audrey are here today to, and John are here today to kind of walk you through the code that was written, to give you an orientation to it. Barring any questions and whatnot, the thought process was in 2 weeks to get comments circulated to me. So this is kind of the first attempt at putting into words and pictures what we've been discussing for the past several months, and I'm going to turn it over to Eric from there to go through it. I do want to make a note that today I'm very hopeful that we'll have some discussion on parking. It seems to be the issue that's always on your agenda, and we never seem to have time to adequately discuss it. I'd very much like to get to it today, so be mindful of your comments and the time in regards to keeping on schedule with the agenda. Also to let you know, there are future steps in this process. We are coming close to defining a proposed action to undertake the generic environmental impact statement under. We will have additional information on that after today's meeting. But today's meeting is solely to focus on the first draft of the form-based code and to begin to address the parking provisions within the code. So with that, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. So really for the meeting objectives, as Sabrina was saying, it's really a kind of a walk through the key elements in order to facilitate kind of the reading and an understanding as you kind of go through the code. And so what we're going to do is kind of focus on the code organization, the key concepts of the Transect and the regulating plan, actually kind of walk through each item in the regulating plan, go through and talk about the administration and approval process, highlight new items and or detail, and provide results of the code testing, and then Q&A. So what we're going to start with is really a recap. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I am just going to kind of go through some of the slides that were presented at the community meeting. What the code really is taking all of that input that we've had and now putting it into words and graphics and really kind of fine-tuning it, tweaking it a little bit. But it's going to be pretty consistent with, in essence, what you've already heard in the past. Then we'll kind of go through and talk about the actual contents. We'll talk about the transect and subdistricts, which will be about the land use, building heights, and density. Then we'll go through the regulating plan itself. We'll kind of focus on one block and just kind of go through each of the particular items, through that step. We'll talk about the approval process, parking, then code testing results, the architecture, green building, affordable housing, and Q&A. So for a recap, not going to read this except to say that the comprehensive plan established a set of policies that looked at livable built environment, harmony with nature, resilient economy, healthy community, responsible regionalism. It also talked very specifically about the Chappaqua hamlet itself, meaning Lower and Upper King. And so this code, this process and this code really just builds on that and starts to implement that. So again, when we start looking at the overall structure, we have the Newcastle zoning ordinance. Within that, we're creating a new article, Article 8, which is the form-based district. In that, then it has its own authority, purpose, administration, and relationship to the town code. It creates the transect-based approach. It has a set of regulations and development standards. It does, as much as it tries to kind of be a standalone document, it really can't be just by itself. It still needs to refer back to certain items within the existing code. And so it does refer back to that, although much of this supersedes many of the things that are in the existing code today. When we talked about a regulating plan, we have a regulating plan from Chappaqua, for Chappaqua, Lower and Upper King. But one of the things that we talked about was the potential to add, for example, the area on Upper King that's currently not in the boundary. Just making sure that the code is written in a way that allows it to be easier to incorporate other areas into the code.
Now, why isn't it in the code?
It simply was not part of the boundary.
Because, I've been driving through the town, trying to see parcels of land that would be a great fit. And there's a parcel of land right next to Walgreens on 7 Orchard Drive, Orchard Ridge, that is ideal for what we wanna do, and it's not in the code.
Well, and it's not in this version of the code, because in order to connect from here up to there, we would be required to speak to many property owners that are not currently zoned business. They're residential property owners. So the Walgreens area is a pocket of commercial. Anything outside of that has not yet been focused on. You know, we initially looked at the entirety in the area, but we pared down to what was realistic for this first attempt. So that's not to say that we can't get there.
Well, I would say that any lot that's fronting King Street, from lower to upper, should be in this code.
So one of the
Because
things.
it's walking, you know, I have friends that are on the next street over on Orchard, even though it's a steep hill, they love to walk, the sidewalk is right there, so I don't know why there's not many, there's a few that are not in this code. And I feel like we shouldn't, and Sabrina and I have talked, lower and upper should be together. If there's people on upper, they wanna walk down to the town, you know, and vice versa, people wanna walk up to Walgreens. But there are a few pieces of property there that are ideal, like this one on Orchard is almost an acre of property, which would be ideal, it's a corner lot. I feel like that should be part of our new zone. And even there's a church across the street, I think it's a Korean church, if that ever gets sold, that's a beautiful piece for multifamily.
So what I'm gonna say is, I'm gonna ask the committee.
Yes.
The working group, you know, as a whole, do you wanna extend this area or do you wanna wait? Okay, I don't know that is a debate or deliberation today, but maybe put it in the back of your minds as Eric talks about this, and we can revisit it.
I would be concerned that it might slow us down and that we have to expand the study that Bonnie's gonna be doing, the seeker, and it might cause Eric to have to back up as well. I think it's something we should really keep in mind, but I know that we seem to be on a time frame and a budget that look, we're on a moratorium.
We are under moratorium.
So we just can't keep going on and on, so if we haven't incorporated this initially, because the town board didn't initially put that into the study, it's tough to do at this point, because I think it will throw a couple wrenches and add time.
And I think that's a very valid point.
I think it's an appropriate thing, but I
Yeah.
think, call it whatever you will,
Well,
maybe we missed it, but
Just to
Right,
bring
which I
people
think
back
we
to
did.
time frame, because we set this meeting with the expectation we would have a first draft. We know that this draft needs to be reviewed and further refined. The existing moratorium expires on December 3rd. The town board, if they so choose, has one more 6-month extension, which will carry us into May. May, with which we will then need to remove the moratorium. The intention was to provide property owners and the community with an indication via the zoning code of what we were looking to achieve. The timing with the GEIS and the work that Kimley Horn is doing is consistent, whereby the town board will be in a position in May and June 2020 of considering the new legislation for adoption. So, you know, the area, the boundary, if we change that at this point, it may extend that time frame, and I don't know that we can afford to do that in facing the moratorium. That's not to say.
Sabrina,
Go ahead.
Was it only limited to one more extension? I don't recall that. I'm not saying that's not accurate, but
You have 3, I think under the law, there's 3 extensions. You've already done 2. You're on your second
and
extension.
nothing would prevent us to address this issue. We're looking at it holistically now as best we can, and nothing would prevent us from coming back to it, because I do think that's a valid point that we should be looking up King Street.
Yeah.
I think someone said towards Orchard, which is fair. But nothing would prevent us from doing that at a later date, correct?
Correct, absolutely, and there's provisions within this first draft legislation that provides for that. You know, but it would.
We have to start from scratch financially and do this whole thing over, because that.
No, we will have a basis to jump off from.
Are we talking 1 or 2 parcels, or are we talking 20 parcels?
No, a few, there's only a few.
I mean, just
And
because
they're,
the
and they're
level,
great parcels of property.
I'm
Great
just
pieces of
wondering, I know, I understand timing and impacts everything, but if it was only 1 or 2 parcels, it may not be an impact to everything. If it's 20, it definitely is an
Right,
impact.
but it's a few, and
So
it's
that's
right on King Street,
Do we
right on the
consider that
sidewalk.
or not?
Saying both sides, right?
Well, I would say if you,
Just
yeah,
below Walgreens.
I'd say you're at 15 parcels.
Yeah, so that would probably add weight to their scope and slow us down. And then maybe it's just in the second run, which they've accounted for.
Yeah, so
And
what
that's
we
what got us on the,
expansion.
that's what got us onto the topic.
Yeah, so what we did is we set this up so that you don't have to write a new code for those parcels,
Okay.
right? The code's already written.
Okay.
All you really need to do is do a new regulating plan, and then of course you have to go through the seeker process. But you're not writing a new code. The code's already done. It's just the regulating plan itself.
And the environmental impact.
Right.
so what would you have to do, go through town board or go through planning board? How does that? No.
No, the town board would look to rezone those areas.
Oh, I see.
It would be this, it would be a process that would be pared down as compared to this process. Because it's a smaller area.
Because you,
And you're not talking
It
about
sounds
what goes in
familiar
the
to
code,
me.
you're just talking about changing the map.
Right.
And then updating
That
the
we should
GIS.
count on it or plan to use it.
yeah, and I think as long as we are moving along, yeah.
Okay.
One last question about this issue. In terms of dollars and time, what are you looking at for us if we wanted to do that next year? I mean, how much more expensive is it as opposed to doing it now and time-wise? Does it make a difference in terms of the effort to do it as opposed to doing it once we've already started the full process?
It would just be part of the adoption process, the town board's gonna adopt this, they would just adopt
Well, if
zoning changes.
Yeah, if we decided once we've gotten this code on the books to expand this district, it is a change in the map is one aspect to it. The bigger aspect is updating the generic environmental impact statement. And we will have the impact analysis for this process to jump off of. So it's a lot
I
easier.
understand, but what are we talking about in terms of dollars? Are we talking another big expense that we can take care of now?
So in other words, what is involved if we just wanna piggyback that zoning change to this process now, if there isn't that many parcels?
I'd have to look at it.
We can't throw a number out there right now.
I just think that these parcels are large parcels, which could be developed in a great way. I really do. They're very nice flat, you
Do
know.
you want them to come back with a proposal to add it?
But I'm checking with Ed regarding the moratorium, because
Okay.
that's really the key factor here, because if we are on this, you know, everything has been designed so that we are mindful of that December 3 date and then the one more, and I'm just trying to get some clarification as to, you know, how tight a deadline are we under?
Where did you find out that you only have 3 extensions?
I thought that was in the
So I
in the code.
I don't remember it that way either.
And I could be wrong, I thought I read that there were 3 6-month extensions allowed.
Well, I think what happens is if you go beyond 3, the courts get very skeptical, you're more vulnerable, but if you have a good reason for doing it, like you're at the 5-yard line of completing a zoning change, you know, then I think it's more likely to be okay. But I don't know if Nick told you that or where that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get some
Yeah.
clarification, I don't have the benefit of them, you know, being here.
Can we
Okay,
plow
it's fine.
forward?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so then when we talked about the concept of transit zones, it's really being character-based about what the regulations are. And so we looked at a typical transect, which is from, T1 through T6. And really, that the focus here is T4 and T5. You're not Mount Kisco, we're also not in the rural area, so it's really Hill and Upper King and Lower King fall within the T4, T5. Not gonna spend too much time on this because we're gonna get into this in more detail on the actual code. But this is what was presented before, that in essence, you had mixed use T5 right close to the train station, Lower King. You then had T5 minus, which meant higher density but no retail permitted. And then you had T4, which was tied to sort of lower building heights. And so we've done a refinement to this, which we'll talk about. With the retail, we really talked about that we should really limit where retail is required, right? Because you don't wanna require retail if it's not gonna work, but you do wanna ensure that you're gonna get retail, at a minimum kind of area to continue really what this area is, right? Because you don't wanna come back and somebody comes back and says, we're just gonna do residential and get rid of the retail. So it was really focused, here on Greeley, King, and then if you were to develop here at the train station, making the connection from Greeley to the train station, and that was it. Doesn't mean you can't have retail elsewhere, but that's just where it's required. So when we talked about building heights, we talked about the fact that 5 stories is appropriate right next to the train line, right next to the train station. That the 5th story should be designed architecturally so that it's something that's not as dominant. Then 4 stories really occurs when you start transitioning over to Greeley, that's what's appropriate there, and on Upper King. Then 3 stories in the transition where you start going up the hill on King Street. This is tied to both the character, the transition to the single families, and quite honestly, just the sizes of the parcel, where you just really couldn't get that much development anyway.
Well, so to that extent, we have looked at it, but I think your position is that the 3-story might be inappropriate for some of those spots,
Yes.
right? Okay. So we actually did look at it, it's incorporated,
Yeah.
but it's incorporated at a lower level
Well,
of
I
density.
think what he's talking about is this area.
Not
Yeah, exactly.
That's the piece.
But
Yeah, and
but
that's
you've
the
got it-
piece that we have had very little communication with property
Right.
owners.
Right. But what we're saying here is it has been looked at, it's being considered for 3-story, right?
No,
Which is what
he's
it
talking
currently
about
is?
the gap
Yeah,
between.
the
Yeah,
think-
it
I
should be
think-
connected.
Yeah, the gap
And that should be
here-
3-story.
His property he's actually talking about right here is right.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Right.
I got it,
Yeah.
I got it, okay, I'm sorry.
So, yes, so without studying it in detail, what I would say is would recommend that 3 stories would continue up.
Yes.
Right.
This is 4 stories, you know, is this one specific lot 3 or 4? I don't know, you'd have to look at it. So then, we talked about frontage occupancy.
391. Yes.
So frontage occupancy is really about the percentage of building facade that occupies the build-to line. And so we see high, medium, kind of medium but a little lower. And so in general, we talked about higher frontage occupancy down here in the core, going to medium as you sort of go down the medium high as you go to the north and to the south, and medium as you sort of continue up the hill or transitioning over here to the south. So those are very general terms, but then we start to get into really specific numbers in the regulating plan. So we basically built on that. We're not radically changing anything different from that. We're just kind of tweaking it and fine tuning it. So the code, this is the table of contents. Kind of a dry slide, but we'll go through the text. It's really the authority. Where does the authority come from to have this district? Its applicability, what does it apply to? Its relationship to other chapters in the code. Then we talk about, in essence, the administration. What's the process? Who reviews things? We talk about non-conforming uses, structures, and lots. That's a quick reference. We talk about then the transect. So the transect then is broken into sub-districts. We have the regulating plan itself, which is much more detailed, and then we have the regulations that go with those particular elements. And then we have a section on really just general development regulations, having to do with things like block sizes, lot standards, parking, and then loading and service. So signs, things like that. Thoroughfares, which is really streets. Not that you're really gonna have a whole lot of new streets. You're really gonna have maybe one street that you're sort of changing the section on, going to the south. And then the other standards are really just there in case at some point you developed a block and you had a new street. These are the standards that would be there. We then talk about affordable and workforce housing, healthy buildings and green buildings, and then the architecture regulations. Even though this is on the table of contents, one of the smallest areas compared to the rest, it actually makes up probably something like 40% of this document. And then we get into the definitions. The one thing I'd say about the definitions right now, this is typically the last thing that you do. So we have a kind of early draft of the definitions. as we kind of finalize it, we'll go through and kind of fine tune that and add more terminology into that. So we'll look at the transect and the subdistricts. So this is the map, this is the transect map. When we look at this, yes, okay. So when we look at this, there are general descriptions of what the general intent is. The reason that's useful is just simply things that might be permitted with an approval by the planning department or by the development department that the code says could be approved. One of the things it says is, well, if it's consistent with the other regulations and if it's consistent with the intent. So this describes what that intent is. What we're gonna do is that we're actually gonna focus on this piece of land here, which makes up multiple parcels. We did that previously in some of the studies that we did leading up to this. And so just as a walkthrough, we're gonna focus on this and kind of go through the Transect map and go through the elements in the regulating plan for this one particular area. So when we look at the Transect map, so let's say I was here and one of two things. Either I said I have a parcel that I want to develop, or I've consolidated the parcels and I want to develop them all together, right? What's the first thing you would do? Well, the first thing you would do is you would say, am I actually in the form-based district? Yes. Okay, now let me look at the Transect map and let me understand which transect I'm in. So in this particular case, we're here, we're in F5. So when we look at F5 then, the tables, I think I highlighted the wrong one, I did. So it would actually be not this red one, but the next red one here, right? So then you have a set of use categories. There's actually a much more detailed use table. Unfortunately, in zoning codes, I was just talking to somebody yesterday where they literally have 500 and some uses listed in their zoning code. They're going through a zoning code rewrite and they're trying to really consolidate that. So what this does is tries to consolidate that so it makes it less cumbersome. And so in essence you would say, well, I'm in F5, can I have a civic building? Yes, that's permitted. Can I have a controlled use? No, that's not permitted. Can I have office? Yes. Can I have public facilities and utilities? Yes, with a special permit. Can I have multifamily? Yes. Can I have single family? No. Can I have townhouses? Yes. Residential 2-family? No. Retail and mixed use? Yes. And so you just define, what can I have there? So then you go, again, I circled the wrong one, it should be this one. It would say, well, what's the maximum height for this sub-district? It's 5 stories. Let me be really clear about that though. That's 5 stories for this Transect sub-district, right, as an absolute maximum. But it's the regulating plan that actually tells you what building height you can have on that particular face of the street. So for example, if I'm up against single family houses, it might be 5 maximum, but the regulating plan is gonna tell me you can only have 3 stories or 2 stories.
Because there's some sort of transition
Right.
observation there.
Right. And so it's kind of the regulating plan gets to the greater level of detail.
But is that like a flat roof, or is that like a gable to the midpoint? What is it?
So here it's measured in stories,
Okay.
not in feet.
Got
Right?
it.
And part of the reason for that is because you have situations where you have a retail first floor. Retails don't want to be 10 feet. They want to be at least 16 feet or maybe 20 feet. So it's really just tied to number of stories. Typically what happens, well, you can either count an occupied roof space. In this case, we would count the occupied roof space as one of the stories.
When you
Make
say
sense?
occupied roof space, is that occupied with tenants
Yeah,
or
Like a residential
mechanicals?
dwelling unit. No,
Okay.
like a residential dwelling unit.
Okay,
Right.
actually,
Yeah, so that would count as a story even though it might be designed to look like a Dutch gable roof or something,
right.
right? It looks like a roof, but it's really a story.
So the first floor, you'll have a max as to what the height will be, like 10 feet.
Just be
So
overall.
what, you could go 60 feet if you have a first floor and then 4.
Technically, but nobody ever would, like why
No.
would you?
Well, will there be a height limit as well?
On the first
as part
floor.
of this form-based code?
No, it's a number of stories.
It would just be stories.
Stories.
So you inviting developers from the city to do mechanical voids, and therefore something that doesn't count as a story would still be height.
What does
So
that
you could
mean?
end
It
up with
is.
a 75-foot high, 4-story building.
Well, that might count as a story.
Not-
Not a whole
not
story
likely.
dedicated to mechanicals.
Right.
It may not count in New York City, but it'll probably count up here as a story.
I say that facetiously,
Yeah.
obviously, but
Yeah.
I don't
that
think that,
seems-
Yeah, but it's not likely. I mean, if you'd like, we can put in a number, right? That sort of says, let's establish a
think?
maximum first
Well,
floor.
one of my
I think you
comments
should
were,
have it
my,
because
one of my
a number.
comments was
A number, yeah.
Yeah.
it all depends
I
on,
think it'll
but
get, I
you,
think,
then you start to regulate
pressure
the
will-
uses that could go on the first floor.
pressure
You're
be-
right, that's
Well,
exactly
then the
right.
pressure will be on us as architects to,
figure it out.
how do I make
Right.
the biggest possible 4-story building? And we're gonna be working those angles.
I don't want that pressure of the
Yeah.
biggest possible. What I want is, what is I don't wanna discount certain retail
That's right.
opportunities because the ceiling heights are not high enough to support
Right.
kitchens,
Yeah.
for example, and fans. I don't wanna disclude that, but I also don't want them to say, oh, we're gonna have 16 foot in every apartment
Right,
and
all the way
cathedral
up.
ceilings.
Right.
Exactly.
Right, and
And
so
70 feet tall.
what is the reasonable height associated with the story?
Yeah, so
Okay?
what I would say is that
For the use of the story.
For the
But
use of the
that's-
story,
but the
if we're
building
looking
code is
at
gonna
that
drive
primary
that.
retail corridor, what makes sense for those commercial
Yeah, because you're
uses,
not
the
gonna get to
restaurants,
16-foot stories
the
because you're gonna max out
you know,
height
the
of building.
cycling, the
So you're not
fitness,
gonna
the
build
want, the clearance when you're sitting on a
16-foot story
bike.
for residential.
What is that
what's that
height,
height
the
then?
minimum
What's the
height
height?
for a first floor retail
realistic.
might be different than in a focus where it's not supposed to be retail.
Yeah, so we can definitely look at that. We don't have to come up with the numbers. I'll just say, generally speaking, retail, you typically wanna have 16 feet. That's a good number, it's comfortable. You could do 20 if you're gonna have a grocery store. They typically want to have probably at least 20. Most of them, the bigger ones want like 25 ideally. And so that would be kind of the cap, right? You would say 25 absolute max for a first story. For the upper stories, right now in the market, you're seeing 9-foot ceilings popular, they're now pushing to 10-foot ceilings.
That's right.
Right, and so you're really in a wood frame
Residential.
construction, you're looking at 11'8" for floor to floor,
Yes.
when you
Right.
account for the structure.
So I think language like that would be helpful to help define in the regulating plan more detail around the height.
Right, and so they'll just throw out there, for those that understand this, if you were doing an infinity system and you were doing really tall, you could even get up to as high as like 14-foot floor to floor, which they're really high floors, I'll say. They have a significant impact when you do 4 stories of that, feels very different than 4 stories of 10.
Yeah,
But
I
the building
think that's our
code comes
concern.
in
Yeah,
here
that
and will
that
regulate
is
that
our
on the
exact
height.
We don't
concern.
need that.
So then they're gonna lose a floor if you do that and it doesn't pencil out.
There has to be some sort of, I think, max. I mean, if you need 25 feet on your ground floor, that's fine, but in the regulating plan, somehow, there's gotta be something in
And
the equation.
I'm gonna tie this back to the market analysis. The stories that were looked at in the market analysis, there was a definitive difference between 3 and 4. Okay, let's make sure we're still consistent with that market analysis and the threshold between 3 and 4 that we were told we had to go to 4 if we wanted to make a difference.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
just to clarify something, so people don't hear 25 feet and get scared. Yes, big supermarkets do like 25 feet, but I don't think we're gonna get a 60,000 square foot supermarket asking to come into the downtown.
Absolutely not.
So, probably not. So 16 to 20 is a really good number, and the only place you may have an issue is if you wanna do a gym or a small theater that needs more height, and maybe that goes into a special use thing, if that
Yes.
comes into play and it's
Yeah.
done by a board.
Yeah.
But everybody else, 20 would be a really good
Yeah.
number.
Yeah, if you wanted to account for things like that, like a gym, you might do something where you could have taller than that. If you
Exceptions
in
for
essence
specific.
take that, it
Take
counts
that
as
other,
2 stories.
right.
Like if you wanna do a basketball court, you need, or a volleyball court, you need more height, so,
Yeah,
but that's a special use.
but you're not having another story or of living on top of that.
You'd be paying a lot for the structure for your
Yeah.
long spans.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
again, I don't think will pencil out down here.
But administratively, would that be in the regulating plan or in?
It would be in these regulations,
in
yep.
these? Okay.
It
We
would be
we
in
would
there.
basically define it and say a story is defined as this, maximum height of this.
Can I just go back to the idea that the regulating plan would somehow further reduce the height, the number
Yep.
of stories? Is that regulating plan some of the documents that
Yes.
we have? Cause I've just been able to get through the initial pages.
If you hold that thought, we'll get there.
Great, alright.
Okay. So the one thing that's not on the table is about density. So this code does not regulate FAR, does not regulate dwelling units per acre. So the reason for that is because when you have the physical form standards, that's gonna automatically limit you. When you have the parking standards, that's automatically gonna limit you. You don't need to kind of artificially come in and say, this many dwelling units per acre. The other part of it though that's key here in the state of New York is that you're gonna do the FGIS, you're gonna have that, right? That's gonna have studied a total maximum development. So any project that comes in has to stay within that total number, right? You sort of have to monitor what's going on here in Chappaqua. That's being done in other places, even high density places like Tyson's Corner, Virginia. They in essence studied a certain density having to do with the transportation system. It's basically first come, first serve. Whoever comes in the door gets that available density. And so that's kind of the process that that's here.
Good incentive. Revitalization,
incentive.
free market.
Question, sewer.
Yep.
Is there a limit to number of dwelling units relative to the sewer systems?
Yeah, that's what the GEIS is going to avail. It will do sewer capacity, it will be do traffic capacity. We know what the stormwater thresholds are, if you can't accommodate it on site. So
Okay.
that's why we are doing the GEIS. That is the intention, is to get all of those thresholds in place to understand the maximum.
Will there be a hard cap possibly on sewer relative to the county?
They haven't put one on us yet.
But it's
Well-
not unlikely that they would, once we get going, it seems to me, because it's not just the county, it's also, we have to go through Yonkers too, don't we?
Yeah, I mean,
This
how
area
far-
is already in the sewer district.
Is that
Yeah,
unlimited
but
then?
Right.
my understanding is it's still not
Well-
unlimited.
Well, but I can tell you that because our acceptance into that sewer district of this area is very old, I don't know that there's a number associated with it.
So we might be grandfathered?
Exactly. Let's see what the GEIS comes up with.
Who feeds back on that from the county?
Well, I'll contact the
The
county.
planning board? Is it- or-
No, I will contact the Department of Environmental Facilities and,
Okay.
you know.
So the county would be involved or an interested agency that the DGEIS would go to.
Right.
And it's their responsibility to look at it and say, oh, wait a second, what are these guys doing up here? Oh,
Right.
it's okay.
Right.
Yeah, no,
I
there's
would-
checks and balances through the GEIS, it's a secret process. So there'll be interested and involved agencies, the county will
Right.
be an interested agent, well, potentially interested, but definitively an involved agency. And they'll receive this information and understand it.
And
Well,
then
and
what-
I would just say, I'd hate to go through this process and get to some sort of,
I don't think we're gonna have any issue,
okay,
And that's same with stormwater,
yes.
if,
okay.
okay.
Yep.
But we'll get the readings on all this infrastructure and the caps through the
And
EIS.
understand.
Right.
And what we're doing is, by doing it this way, you guys don't have to do it
You don't have to
individually.
deal with it, right?
Right.
It'll be done.
Right,
Right.
We'll know what
And
it
that's
is.
what-
If you fall within it,
right.
If you wanna go over it, then you have to go study it.
Yeah.
That's the way they've done it in New Rochelle. And they're jumping out, they're almost approaching their cap in New Rochelle at this stage.
yeah.
And the cap was from the.
They did a DGEIS and they said,
DGIS.
they had, rather than just one area, they had like 6 areas all kind of clumped together.
Yeah,
And they had a cap in each area,
okay.
and as you reach the cap, then that's it.
Dwelling unit cap.
Yeah, you can't go in under the guise of the DGEIS. You can go in after the cap, but you'll have to do your own new seeker analysis and
Oh,
prove that you're not
oh,
making
I
sense
see.
for us.
Okay.
Right, and folks, this is how this is the intention of doing this is to get the amount of development that the community wants. Not less, not more. We're looking at the scope of what we think would be acceptable, and we are telling the development community, this is what we want, instead of having them come to us and say, this is what I wanna build.
Right.
Okay, it's very different.
And Sabrina, I hate to intrude, but there's 2 real benefits to this for the DGEIS. Number one, when you have independent parcels coming before you, it's hugely inefficient. Everybody's got to do an EIS, right? So you're doing it all together, it's much, much more efficient. And secondly, when you have individual parcels come, each one looks at his impact and her impact and his impact and her impact. There's no cumulative impact. This does a cumulative impact. So you're getting efficiency and you're getting the cumulative. So I think it's really good from that
Right.
perspective.
Right.
Alright, so when we look at the regulating plan, then it's hard to see on here, but lots of little numbers, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna zoom in, and we're gonna look at one particular block. And so when you look at this, you have a lot of little symbols and numbers, so we're gonna walk through what each of those are. So one of the things here is they have block numbers. That really has no purpose except to make it easy to talk about, right? So if I'm talking on the phone to somebody and I say, oh, I'm in block 2A, everybody knows which one you're looking at. The build to line, this is just an example, not of this particular building type. It's just simply showing you have a curb. In this case, you have a green strip, you have a sidewalk, you have a property line. The red line represents the build to line. So that's different than a setback line, right? Currently in zoning, when you have a setback line, you're allowed to put your building there or further back. In a build to line, it's the opposite. It says you must build your building at this line. You can't put it back 50 feet further back, right? Because then you don't get Chappaqua, right? You don't get that walkable compact place. So this establishes what that build to line is. So here it says 16 feet. It's measured from the curb to the build to line. 16 feet, that's basically what you have today. That's why it says 16 feet. So most of the places in the regulating plan are based on what's there today. In some places that, if you were to develop to the south by the train station, then you establish new ones that were just sort of deciding that this is what would be most appropriate.
Is 16 desirable, or would you, if every, clean slate, would you pick a different number?
Not necessarily, I think 16 is probably a good number.
No, the 91 Bedford Road project that we're doing, that's around 16 feet.
Yeah.
And that feels pretty good.
Yeah, when you talk about just retailers, right, we have different clients that are retailers, some like 14, some like 16, some like 20.
Yeah, if you get a cafe, 18 is the highest number, because the cafe zone starts to narrow up where
Right,
people
right.
can walk through.
Okay.
But it's saying you must build to 16, and you could go closer,
No.
No.
no?
With porches.
Build
What are
to.
you saying?
So you're saying you have to build at 16. So they're different
No more, no less.
That's
No
it.
more, no
Gotta be
less.
there, yeah.
Got it, alright, sorry.
I say that way just to keep it simple.
Yeah,
You actually can't really build buildings that way, right? And so the language in the text actually says, well, you can go back for a portion of the building 3 feet, up to 3 feet from that, right? Because you get really boring buildings.
Right.
Yeah. It's just,
It's all
right, right,
It's
right.
just a wall.
yeah.
Right.
So there are, or in places where you're not in an urban streetscape, right? If in a place where you have a green strip and then a yard, a little dooryard, then you should be able to have a porch. And that porch should be able to project beyond that building.
But are you saying 3 feet back only, or can some pieces go back 4 feet, 5 feet, depending on what the architect
No.
wants to do?
So it's 4 feet, there's some language that allows, the building department, is that what we were calling it? The building department, development department, a little flexibility to allow a little more.
Okay.
But it really is limiting that much.
It's really good.
And that is, again, go back to the goals and the different areas, the different districts, F4, F5, F3, F2, F1, are crafted on this specificity, okay? In a more dense, commercial, mixed area, mixed residential, commercial area, you wanna create a street.
Right.
This is creating that street, the walkable, livable street, okay? So that's why, and so if you, as we carry on, he's doing Eric is providing you with an explanation of the meaning of what a build to line is. You will look at the regulating plan and you will see different setbacks for the different districts. If you further read in the regulating plan, there will be exceptions, as Eric has talked about, with, ability for my office to say, yes, this is consistent with the walkable, livable community.
Right.
And if you're envisioning that there's retail at the base of most of those buildings, you're gonna wanna maximize your retail square footage to rent.
Correct.
Right.
That's right.
So the second is based on that build to line is frontage occupancy. And that means what percent of building sits on that line. So here it's 74 to 100, there are two numbers. So there's, we introduced the concept of the second number because of a comment that we heard, which was we don't wanna have just the solid wall, right? And then we showed a rendering which showed the upper stories with courtyards that came back. And so what we do, let me first go through the base one. If you look at this particular block, this is 100% frontage occupancy, meaning there are no gaps. It's just building from end of block to end of block. If you look at this side of the block, this is 83%. There's a gap here, there's an opening for a driveway, there's a little gap here, there's another gap here. So that's 83%. In reality, you would never state an exact percentage because life isn't that precise, right? It's a range, right? So this might be something like 75 to 90%, right?
But by saying 100%, you're allowing
Yes.
100%.
Right.
You're requiring.
No, that's a
No, you're
range.
saying, sorry, it
Well,
says
that's a
74,
question, yeah.
it
Yeah,
says
it's a range.
74 to 100.
Yeah,
I
you
would
gotta
just
be
argue,
within that.
I would not want it to be 100. I would want to require that there be modulation in the facade so that somebody doesn't come in and just build a straight wall, right?
And that also strikes me as another one of these first come, first served things, so if someone puts in 100%, the next person coming in is gonna be stuck with.
yeah, so that's a good
Yes.
point. So the way that we deal with that is that, if you
Fill
look
the
at the
gap.
notes at the bottom here, right?
Yeah.
If you were to consolidate the properties, then it would be 74 to 100% for the entire block.
Right.
If you're only
I
this
see.
property owner,
I see.
right? Then you look at this and you say, well, in reality, it's 70% minimum for lots shorter than 100 feet, 60% minimum for lots shorter than 92 feet. And that's because if you look at a lot that's 90 feet, you have to be able to get in to get to the parking, right? There's no way that you can be 100% or 90% or 80%. So you have to sort of allow and accommodate for those kinds of situations with small lots.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it's interesting because we have, like, in your building, is it 10-foot setback?
Yes.
6 foot?
Yes,
No.
10 foot,
10 foot.
10
on the
foot.
front, 10-foot setback.
Oh, no, from the side, on the side
the
yard's setback.
We made it
6.
We
6
made
is
it
the
10, we
required.
wanted to 6.
Right,
But I think the code was 6, wasn't it?
Yeah,
correct.
because if another building comes up,
Yeah.
you know,
So
there's
tight.
that gap, right?
Right.
So this would help that, I guess, right? It would regulate that better, because you guys did it voluntarily.
That's right.
Yes.
To get,
Well,
I think, a
this,
better
you're talking about
result,
a
right?
side,
Yeah.
you're talking about a side setback.
Yes,
Right.
also this is, right, with the gaps, so the
Well,
alleys.
this may
No,
not have a
no,
side setback,
this
you could have
doesn't-
0 lot line
Yeah.
with 2
Well,
neighbors developing next to each other.
Yes.
Okay.
So in the, I don't have it
But
in
if,
here, but
but
in
if
the,
I
in
wanted
the-
to develop next to you, then I would have to make sure my other side has a gap between us over here.
Right, okay,
Or my gap's gotta be in the middle, but I need a gap.
right, okay.
Right. But technically and typically based on building code, right, you can either do a party wall on your party line, and that's in here in the table for lots, right? It's either, you're either 0 or you're 6 minimum,
Yeah, so 6.
yeah.
And is this a lot through gap, or is this just a street wall gap?
It's not through the entire lot, that's an interesting comment,
Yeah, I
You have
envisioned
to
it,
look at
it was a wall, it was an opening to
Yeah.
get through.
That's
Like,
right, yeah.
like there where you're, it's an open, it's either a pedestrian or vehicular via to get through to what's
Right, so it's
inside.
either delivery access
Yeah.
or,
But you're thinking it's
Parking
going
access.
all the way through the lot?
Not through the lot, I mean, like, looking at the photograph there where the 83 is, you know, that opening goes into a whole big center area,
Right.
but that
Right.
does not continue through. It does some other place, it looks like there's a penetration, but it's not a straight through all the way.
Well, yeah, so is this modulation of the street wall so that somebody can set back 10 feet and that's the gap, but there's a building wall there, or is this a cut?
Yeah, well, we can better
further
define that
in?
as to what the minimum depth
Right,
is,
right.
yeah,
Should go with the intent. Whatever the intent is.
yeah. Okay, so then, if we go to the bottom image, this is from the perspective, and so, for example, on this street, if you were to consolidate properties, and I just picked a line, right? Say your property line goes from here to here, this would be 100% on the ground floor. Then there's a separate number, the upper number, that states 50 to 70% as the range, right? 70% maximum. And so here, this shows 50% on the upper floor. I'll tell you that we did code testing where we had our LA office go and do a sample study, like they didn't do this code, right? They're just saying, hey, if I were a developer, what would I do? And they pointed out a problem with this, and so we'll address that in the text, but in just how we worded it. It's very specific to this block, but we'll get to that.
Well, and that is a primary concern that was raised by this group, particularly on Lower King Street where you have the ability to go up on both sides. So that language needs to be fully vetted and we need to make sure that we're not ending up with the canyon effect.
Right, and so the code testing did exactly what it was supposed to do. Which
Okay.
is to say, are there any issues with the way we worded it? And there are.
Okay.
And so we'll fix that. But we'll get to that. So then building height. As I talked about before, in the F5, right, you have a maximum building height, but each of these boxes says 2 to 4 stories. There are two ends to that. It's that A, it has to be at least 2 stories, because at 1 story, it doesn't really define the public realm very well. And 2, it has a maximum of 4 stories. So there are places in the plan where this isn't the right place, but for example, at the very southern end, there's a maximum, I think it was, of 3 stories. So it's very specific to the site of where it is. So then we have the retail, that's this orange bar. This is where retail is required. There's no orange bar here, so retail's not required. It's permitted if you want to, but it's not required.
Just a little confused on how the percentages work
Sure.
with when you're not consolidating properties and you have multiple property owners there. And so
Yep.
folks come in and they wanna develop and they're thinking, you know, oh, I have to meet this certain percentage and that food hall, which is, you know, let's say exists today, it's a place like Scattered Books or it's a place like Susan Lawrence, which is a single story or 2-story. And if they're using that in determining their calculations, does that then mean that that percentage, to kind of Bob's point, gets used up?
No.
Such that then, you know, 5 years from now, when Susan Lawrence wants to redevelop their property, there's no more existing capacity to be able to go up further at that.
No, so this is the percentage for the whole block, right? But if you're this, the black lines represent the existing properties. If you're this property owner, right, then you would look at this standard that says that you're 70% minimum for lots shorter than 100 feet along the build-to
Oh,
line.
I see, okay, got it.
Right, but in this case, this particular property could go to 100. Right, it's a 70% is the minimum,
That's Susan Lawrence.
right?
But in theory, your question would apply to the whole study area in the DGEIS based on the maximum build out. So if we're gonna identify a maximum build out of X number of residential units and Y thousand square feet of commercial space.
Right.
And in the future, if the residential units are 95% built out based on the DGEIS and you come in and you wanna do 100 units and that puts you 50 over the limit, then somebody's gonna say, wait, this DGEIS was evaluated for, 500 units, you're now 50 over the limit, and you've gotta go back and do secret. But you're a long way from there.
Right.
I just wonder if it sets us up for a bit of like a feeding frenzy from the get-go, because there's a certain capacity that's available now that, once we kind of reach that, then you've maxed out, so it incentivizes development to happen immediately as opposed to happening in a more gradual type
The extent
way.
of development that we've been discussing, in speaking with the Commissioner of Public Works, there is plenty of wastewater capacity, okay? There's plenty of water capacity. The 2 areas of stronghold to prevent development are stormwater
And parking.
and parking. And that exists today. Folks, that exists today, and there will be caps on that because folks don't have the land area, the size of their lots to develop individually today.
Yeah, that's kinda not what I meant though, I wasn't really talking about infrastructure capacity as much as I was talking about some of the limitations that we're building in from a form perspective.
So your concern is there could be a rush for people to come in, do development, and all of a sudden Chappaqua will be changed within 7 years, let's say. It'll be built out within 7
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of practical limiting factors that will make that not possible, right? So one of the things was just sizes of lots, right? So this particular very narrow lot here probably really can't develop it any more dense than it currently is, right?
That's
Unless
scattered
you were to consolidate with other property owners, which that's a process in itself to go through.
See, and by the way, so I throw in, that's the part of this that I particularly object to, because I believe that those small property owners believe that this process will result in them being able to do something more with their one-story building.
If you had a one-story building and you said, I wanna demolish my one-story building and do a first four-story building?
Yeah.
They can.
Sure.
Sure.
You can do
But
it.
if they don't have
let's-
the you're saying if they don't have the parking.
Let's move on because we
But
can.
there's stuff in
So
there
we'll
that
get
talks
to
about
that.
how
Yeah,
that parking's
we'll
done.
get to
Yeah,
that.
it's a very
Okay.
good question.
It was
Okay.
3 o'clock, time check.
Sorry.
So we talked about building height, retail, frontage. So it also talks about frontage, so in this case, it's PH 16. It simply says, well, when you're on this street, it would not be okay for you to come in and have grass, right? This is a shopping district, this is a shopping area. And so it really specifies what that section looks like from curb to building face.
Where is that, Aaron, where is?
So this little label here, that is on
Yeah.
each block,
Yeah.
it says PH 16.
Okay.
And so that would be, PH 16 happens to be tree pit and hardscape 16,
Okay.
which says you're gonna have a hardscape surface from the curb to the building face. That applies if it's public. It also applies if the property line happens to not be all the way to the building face, that it's paved all the way from curb to building face. So you're basically characterizing what that streetscape is. So there are, I think, 3 or 4 different ones in here in the code.
Paved or concrete? We have concrete now.
Yeah.
Right, so it would be concrete.
Yep, could be,
We
yep.
don't want paved.
But so
Yeah, that's what it means.
Pavers.
well,
Concrete.
so along like 1 South Greeley, where you're going up the King Street Hill.
Yep.
They actually, the property owner actually asked to maintain a little strip of green along the building line.
Yeah, so there's a different section, it's not shown on the slide, but in the code, it's a different section that shows paving, meaning concrete, right, from curb to the property line. But from there, it can be grass,
Okay.
right, cause it's a different character than down on
No,
Greeley.
no, and it's true, their property, yeah.
Yep, so we basically looked at what's there today, yeah.
And are there vegetative requirements as well in the same area?
They're for planting street trees, yes.
Okay, and when we do that, I guess 2 questions here. When we do that, if we're going to leave things as is, will we have some sort of recognition of the problems that we have with the infrastructure there, i.e. poles, wires that are there, and select the appropriate trees on one side versus the other? Or, better, will there be a requirement with when building owners put these things in to help out and put in a district where we have underground infrastructure?
For,
Wires, electrical.
I can't remember, I think it's in there, I can't remember, I think it is.
I know
It'll
it
take
is, poles,
forever.
cut the pole.
If you were to do
Or you
a
take the poles
large,
down and just,
yeah,
Let it down.
yeah.
if you're to do a large project, right, it makes sense to do that underground. If you have a small lot here and a small lot here, and he's gonna demolish his building and do a 4-story building, we really can't pay to do
Right.
underground all these utilities, right, cause it's not just what's in front of his property. Yeah.
So perhaps in a consolidation, it would be
Yeah.
something that could be considered.
Well,
Maybe.
you should think about that, yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a large cost associated with
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I think the town's familiar with that.
And we have looked at it
A very large
time.
I think your
Very
existing, I
large.
think your existing code actually does say
It
for
does.
new projects that needs to be underground.
It does, for
Yeah.
new subdivisions and residential projects, I don't think it doesn't talk about
Right.
commercial. I think that where the economies make sense, that it would be preference, but I don't think
Yeah,
we
you don't wanna
force somebody
deter
to do it.
developers and
Yeah,
say you
it's
have to
very
put,
expensive.
very
Yeah.
expensive.
It is, but if you don't put something in the code, they're not gonna do it. I mean, there's no incentive for them to do it unless they
Right.
feel that their buildings, especially if it's for sale, is gonna be more marketable, if it doesn't
I
have
think if we
telephones
look at new
pulled right
areas,
outside
like
the
if
front.
we were to
Right.
consider something like in the Transect
They should-
Vegetation
Well,
yeah,
parking
then I
lots
would
and
ask.
whatnot.
Yeah, what we
If
could do.
somebody's doing all of 2A,
Yeah.
and maybe even 4A, you have a really good argument there to do it. It has to,
consolidation.
they need a certain amount of density
So we
so
could
they can pay
say,
for it.
right, we could say that any project of a minimum size of X
Right.
Right.
is required to do that. Yeah.
What do
Okay,
you think X would be?
200, 300 units?
500?
That's at the train station.
so special architectural features.
I asked them all that.
You have here a light blue square, you have here kind of an orange square. What that represents is that there are three types, a corner tower, symmetrical facade on axis, and a prominent building element on axis. So what that really says is that what we're requiring is there's some kind of a corner element, like a tower, which would be a maximum of a half story higher than the max height. What is it exactly? I don't know. It's up to the design person that's designing it, right?
Say
There's-
somebody wanted to hit the other corner on the lower left hand. Go to your blue square, then go up a little bit to the left.
All against the
Yeah,
track.
say they wanted to mark off that road and do a tower there, would you let 3 elements? Or is it restricted just to these 2 spots?
So the way the code's written right now is that that spot has to have a required corner element.
Okay.
This does not. It could.
It could, okay,
Yes.
that's fair.
Right, and again, that those elements are defined based on the existing streetscape and the features across the street from that. And kind of key points when you come into the hamlet,
Yeah,
you
oh,
know,
it's-
there-
it makes
Does
sense.
that come into play only if you're developing the entirety of the block, or
Yeah.
if just that little individual property owner in that corner wanted to redo their property?
If they were gonna demolish their building and
Uh-huh.
build new, then
Uh-huh.
they would need some kind of a
They
corner
would, it
element.
would be required.
So that could be a little, you look at the
Yeah,
the top
yeah.
image, that could just be like a little
Yeah,
crown with a clock.
okay.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be
Doesn't have to
huge.
elaborate.
It just-
We're looking for a weather vane now? We
A
already
weather
have
vane,
clock?
okay, sorry. But it's really just to mark the corner, say, hey, this is the center of town, this is an important corner for us.
In a consolidation, must it be a constructed piece, or could it be an open pocket park?
So open space, so the way the text is
Or
written.
whatever it might be, I mean,
Yeah.
just even something cantilever where there's a little bit of open space underneath, or would that satisfy, or do we have to have something that's a wind vane?
It doesn't have to be a wind vane,
Well,
but it has to be something.
Some sort
Some
of,
vertical
Just throwing
element.
that out there.
No, I like
Object.
Bob's idea.
It's an
I like
object.
that.
So,
Open-
give flexibility.
openness. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the open space. So the open space, it's in essence what you already have, right? Or there's the crescent green by the train station that gets larger. Out front, in front of this building, we're having a required open space, right at the corner.
Really, cause it's gonna be a parking lot.
In the future, when you redevelop this building,
Okay.
right? So it would
Well,
require.
just don't wanna burst your bubble, it's gonna be a parking lot.
all painted green.
Yeah.
It'll be a green parking lot.
Right, so, but the challenge here is you can't really come in and say, well, I'm gonna build a park on top of your property, right? Cause then at that moment, you basically have to purchase the land.
No, giving flexibility though to a developer.
Yes,
if-
so the way that
If they
it's-
consolidate, they wanna do that.
Right, so the way that it's written in the code is that, you can incorporate additional open or green space. I believe it's written that it cannot occur at a corner. But then I think it's also written that the at the discretion of the development department, as long as it's consistent with the intent, can be approved.
And that's my
Corners would be
highest
really
retail
attractive.
rent, that blue dot.
Yeah, but that would be up to the developer.
Yeah, that'd be up to the
Could
developer.
make it very
That'd
attractive.
be your
also.
highest retail rent. the blue
Not likely a
Yeah,
developer
you're
would do that, but, yeah. So the approval process, Joel, do you wanna talk about this?
Sure. So the idea here is to streamline the review process considerably compared to what you have today. And so it's all administrative in that it's all gonna be done by the development department. None of this comes to the planning board or zoning board of appeals. So it starts with recognizing that you already have the GEIS done, so you know, you don't have the seeker problem to overcome as you would if you're doing it in any other way. So there are these basically 3 steps to approval. If the application is found to be consistent with code, first stage is concept review, which is just a general concept. Then design review, and Well, design review, construction document review, and then after those stages, then the administrative approval is given, which then is basically telling the building inspector that it meets all the zoning requirements, and then you file a building permit application. If it meets the building codes, then it gets approved for a building permit. Now, Eric, I'm not, you should explain what's on the side.
Yeah, so the one thing that, we've used these terms before, the construction document review, that term is a little confusing, right? Because in reality, that should be occurring here at building permit application. Also, asking somebody to change something significantly in a construction document at that stage is unfair, right? So it's really just a terminology thing, is that we just shouldn't confuse it with the word construction. And instead, let's just use the typical architecture terms of concept review, schematic review, design development review.
So now,
That's much easier,
now Sabrina, here though, ARB doesn't look at it until they file the building permit?
correct.
So nobody looks at the outside the
We
building
have the-
until they're,
We have the ability, so typically right now, the one area we don't have a professional in that we in-house is architecture. There's the ability, the way the code is written, that we can hire or consult with an architect to do the architectural review.
aha.
So it would not be the ARB, because I'll tell you that we've been hired to review architecture. It is a time commitment to do this.
Right, the ARB has specific purview per the town code, which doesn't meet with the needs of this.
So,
Okay, this
So
is
you
much
hire
more
like a Bob.
detailed. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
so I think there's something that we could talk about that can make this a lot easier. I do a lot of building in all these towns. Town of North Castle has an RPRC board. So before we hand in for a building permit,
It's RPRC.
RPRC, I don't,
Yeah, it's
You know what,
those
it's-
4 letters, some combination.
the engineer is at the meeting, ARB is at the meeting, a person from the ARB, town engineer, building inspector, Adam Kaufman, the planner. And we all sit in a room like this, they meet I think once a week, and we go through the plans, and if everybody is okay, then you go to your building permit
Right, well, and this
application,
process,
instead of going back and forth.
this process is that, Steve.
So there'll be a meeting, like
The reason it says development department is because that is the department that houses the building inspector, the planner, the town
'cause
engineer.
everybody will know what's going on.
Correct, and that's why, that's why, under the
Makes it
the
very easy.
guidelines of the GEIS and the FEIS, with the professional review, and we are checking to make sure 2 things. It is consistent with the GEIS and consistent with other town codes as well as building codes. Okay, once it gets through the light purple box, it then goes to the building office, the building division, where you submit your building permit application and everything that goes along with that and is reviewed by the building inspector. Okay, the building inspector also participates in that purple box.
Okay.
Okay, because that, in our town, the building inspector is the zoning code enforcement officer. There's language within the code that deals with what happens if you don't comply with the secret, with the form-based code. You know, what if you need a variance? It then gets bumped out of this process.
That's what this meeting, when I go to the town of North Castle,
Yeah.
they tell us right then and there, you have to go for a variance.
Yes.
Okay, we all know we have to go for a
And
variance.
that's that purple box.
But don't we have that sort of?
We don't have
mechanical-
that
No, we do
here.
not.
We do
We
not
do
have
So
not.
when you hand stuff in.
Let's use 91 Bedford, okay? I worked with
She
Steve
did.
and Bill for over a year.
Yeah.
For over a year to bring their building more into acceptability with the comprehensive
Yes.
plan, and in this case, in meeting the zoning code. We identified where if they wanted to go for variances, if they wanted certain things that would need variances. That was done between myself and the applicant, and then it went through the planning board process.
See, that's what.
Okay, but I thought it would also go to Bob, you know, for example, engineering at some point before it came to
There
us.
was, there's
no,
not
and that's
been
what it
enough
should.
time,
Right,
but
but
there,
it should
there
be-
has not
should
been
know.
enough time
Okay.
in the day to
Right.
do a pre-review.
Right.
By creating a process where you have guidelines of secra, it then gives that time allotment, if you will, to the other professionals to have eyes on it, because then it means a building permit application.
Right.
Okay, because we review it one of two ways. I review it either for the applicant in preparation of your board, or it's a building permit application.
Right.
This will take the review, the process for the developer out of the board review because we've done the seeker analysis. If they aren't consistent here, it goes back to the boards.
Oh, yeah, I understand. I thought we had sort of that
We do
system
not.
now.
We
before it
don't.
came to
We
us.
have one
difficult.
meeting, we have a pre-application meeting
Okay.
where we give them
And
first
not
blush.
everybody-
It's not sufficient then.
Correct.
No, it
Well,
really
the
doesn't
plans are
mean.
not developed to the
That's
point
right.
where they need to be reviewed.
Let me be clear though about the architecture. There is a lot more regulations here having to do with the architecture. And so when you're in these steps, you're reviewing the plan, the site plan. That's probably not very hard, right?
Right.
To take that and review it. It's the architecture that's gonna take more, there are more requirements, so it's much more clear as to what's expected, but then it also means that it's reviewed in sort of greater level of detail. I will say that in our preference, like the concept review is very preliminary, meaning give us a hand drawing. Like, don't invest a lot of time, right? Just
Right.
give us a hand drawing, we
Right.
meet, we look at it.
Everybody's on the same page and everybody understands. When you give a document to someone who then sits on it for 3 weeks and then gives it, this takes all of that out of it. You go to this one meeting, everybody sits around a table, everybody talks, and everybody comes up with a plan for that particular piece of property. It's inviting, it's friendly.
Oh, you're talking about the initial kind of meeting?
Yes.
So there's a
Well,
pre-application conference that occurs
But explain
here.
this looks to me like this is 3 separate meetings.
Yeah, so I think what
This-
you're referring to is kind of a pre-application conference, right? It's kind of like you come in, if you want to come in with a little quick sketch or something, great.
No, like town of North Castle, I had plans, I had site plans, and we talk about the property, and if everything looks good, it goes to the building department for a permit. If it doesn't look good, then it goes back to the drawing boards.
Yeah, I think you can kind of do that, right? Like, if you were to come to me and and I looked at it, it would be like, yeah, it looks like it's generally there. I'd still have to go back, right, to my office to actually like, let me do the calculations, let me make sure everything's copacetic, right?
And that's what they do before they issue the permit.
Right, but it does,
I'm trying to stop all the steps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
There's
Steve's
way too
looking
many
for a
steps.
one-step thing and
There
you've
is
got
no,
three.
there is no
right?
one-step thing. You may already be at design review, Steve, okay? Because you know what properties you own, you've thought about this.
Uh-huh.
Your neighbor may not have a clue, and they're gonna come in once the zoning code is adopted, and they're gonna say, what can I do here? You know, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that. Okay, but it really, this is designed to expedite the process based on what you already know, given the GEIS and the form-based code.
Well,
yeah,
who
so
is-
if
so
you
just
if
so
you
I
comply
understand,
with the regulations.
who is doing
it should be
Right,
quick.
and that's
who
what
is-
that
who
RPRC
from the
board
town
is.
doing those steps with the applicant? So is it gonna be one person?
No,
It's gonna be a little group.
it's a group.
Okay, so the applicant's gonna meet with that group 3 separate times before a building permit application.
Correct.
Okay.
Sounds like a minimum.
Yeah, I mean, you don't
How is
necessarily,
that, so,
you don't
so
necessarily
how,
have to
what's gonna
meet.
keep that from being a planning board, a 3-month planning board process?
There is no planning board.
If they
I
don't
know
break
it's,
the umbrella.
it won't be called the planning
If they
board,
don't break
but
the umbrella.
it would still be
But
potentially.
I think maybe what you're
that-
getting at is that for really small projects that are pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
maybe you don't need 3 steps, is that
Yeah.
kind of what you're getting at? And
Yeah.
I mean, and
What
it
are-
might be possible to put something into the code that allows for a more expedited review of a smaller project.
Well, if
that's
it's a
cool.
simple project,
be.
wouldn't the 3 steps really just be,
One
you know,
big
one?
One
step.
meeting.
Yeah.
Could you do them
Yeah.
all at once?
Yeah.
Of course.
If you
Yeah,
think of it from,
absolutely.
if you think of it from
That's
the
what I,
perspective
yeah, that's
of,
what we would,
It's, but the onus is on you as the applicant.
listen,
Prepared.
to be prepared.
Yeah.
And to be compliant.
And
I
to be
would,
compliant.
Right,
as the
because if you come in
architect,
and you say, I wanna come in at design development review, that's the level I wanna submit to you.
correct,
Right?
right.
And you're consistent, that's great.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're not consistent, you've spent that money,
Right.
And it's not my responsibility to say, you don't comply.
So one thing that occurs to me though is it makes your department very powerful in this process, and also makes me wonder whether you are appropriately resourced to be able to handle this sort of responsibility. So you mentioned before that there's potentially a need for an architect to be a part of this, so I'm just wondering, as you've implemented this in other places, does this necessitate a change in the way that this kind of a department would be staffed, or would, you know?
Yeah, so what's typically happened is that in smaller jurisdictions, the kind of site plan stuff is pretty easy to administer. It's the architecture which requires a greater level of expertise, and so they'll, in essence, contract it out. So they'll have like a standard fee, like
Which is
if
what
you
you were talking
you
about.
submit a project, you have this fee for the reviewer, you have a consultant that, you know, you basically hire on an as needed basis to come in and review it. And what they're
the
doing is
authority-
reviewing for compliance, right? They're
Right,
not
they-
reviewing for, this is my opinion.
I don't like it.
Yeah, no,
Right.
we don't have that authority. Our authority will be vested in what is consistent with the analysis that has been done.
So I think you've gotta pair it to a one-step process, it's a form-based code submission. You're
Does it meet or
documenting
doesn't it meet?
architectural, zoning, whatever else, and preliminary engineering information so that the development department can determine that you're conforming
And this is,
to those requirements?
well, let me say something here, okay?
Yeah.
Because right now, we have varying degrees of pre-application meetings to submit an application for planning board. Some developers are ready to go, one meeting, here you go, looks, here's your application materials, prepare them, submit, give us the fees, we'll get you on the agenda. Others come back 3-4 times for pre-application meetings because they are uncertain what they wanna do. They go back, they have their design charrettes with their professionals, they come back again. So this process, and again, maybe we just need language to make it more flexible, pending the development stage of the applicant.
I'll just tell you that from my experience, because we have been hired to review buildings, is that there are times when you need every one of these steps. Because as crazy as it seems, right, a developer might come in and literally ignore the code. And just say,
Yes,
I wanna do this.
yes.
That's not
And
that
so,
crazy.
and so the first review is to simply say, you never even opened this document. Let me point out, you don't comply with these things, please go back. That's one review. Then they come back and they say, okay, now I've actually read the code, now I've done it, kind of, right? And then you come back and you say, I'm sorry, but you didn't do these things.
So I guess meeting to meeting, the town will determine if it's ready to go right to a building permit application.
Correct.
Versus come back.
Well, versus planning board, you have public
Yeah,
meetings or
yeah,
public
you're
hearings, all this
staying
kind
on
of
a
stuff.
planning
So
and
this
zoning
is-
board,
Much
think of all the
more
time
should
you
be-
save there.
yeah.
So we've had it,
Look at
we've
two
had
of
it,
us.
we've had it where somebody came in and they were very compliant.
Customers.
I'm gonna miss you guys.
Alright,
We've had it where somebody was very compliant, right? And the review time is like, it's like a day, right? You sit there and you go, yeah, it does everything.
Well, that's what the town of North Castle, I went that day within 40 minutes.
Right.
Okay, you comply with everything, go for a building permit.
Right.
It was simple, it was easy.
But then again, it depends on whether you're compliant or not with the
And
regulation.
how long
And
have
they
they
had
had that
everybody
system
there.
set up? How long have they had that system set up?
A long time.
They've worked out the,
They're kinks.
yeah, so you gotta let Newcastle do the same.
Yeah, I think we should.
So we'll take a look at the wording for that. Obviously, if you're gonna do a very small project, you could probably consolidate all the steps. But it does put the onus on the applicant to
Definitely.
make sure
Always
that they're
does.
doing
Let me,
it.
let me just
Well,
point
where
out.
it belongs.
Well, when you're reviewing this draft, that slide that Eric just showed you still has the old language in it, but it's gonna be changed in the
Okay.
next draft, so.
Right, the schematic review, design development. You wanna talk about this?
Sure, so built into the code as a by right feature, are these minor deviations from what's in the code can be also approved administratively according to the criteria in the code, and these include minor deviations from dimensional requirements, public and private street alignments up to 50 feet, open space configurations, build to line deviations of 15% or less, frontage occupancy deviations of 5% or less, and 5% other dimensional use. Then on the use table, there's a category of land uses that aren't listed but are similar in character, scale, and impact to ones that are listed. Cul-de-sacs are not allowed unless there's a physical barrier, so that's another determination that can be made by the development department. Parking reductions, the higher percentage of compact spaces when demonstrated, the higher use of compact spaces occurs. If a new street is required, when it complies with regulations, it could be approved administratively. And substitute materials for buildings when they meet specific conditions. These are all provided for right in the code, so nobody has to, you have to ask for it, but you don't have to go to any board or anything, you just go to the development department. It's part of the same conversation you're already having. And then, so what does that leave for the planning board and zoning board of appeals? Well, one of the things that we've done is, since all of these decisions are administrated by the development department, and in the normal course of events under New York state law, if somebody can always appeal an administrative decision to the ZBA. Our thinking on this is that the planning board is going to be more tuned into the intent and content and specifics of the code. So since there's an appeal right by law, the question is sort of who should handle it, and we're recommending that it be the planning board rather than the ZBA. But special permits still have to be done by the planning board, and variances have to be done by the ZBA.
There are special permits, planning board or zoning board?
Well, in the special permit provisions within the existing code, it gives zoning board, planning board, and town board. What they're saying here is that the planning board should be the grantor of special permits within the form-based zoning district.
Gotcha.
Okay, that needs to be clarified in the language now, because it doesn't specify, because otherwise it's really the zoning board that's kind of the lead board on special use permits.
Right, so
Unless otherwise specified.
that conflict is gonna be clarified.
Correct, and so we need to insert a paragraph that if you're looking for a special use permit within the form-based zoning district, that the approving authority would be the planning board.
Or the town changes it and makes it the planning board,
What?
right?
No.
Well, it actually is already in the
it
code.
needs a special call out.
Well, there is, it's on section B3 of, anyway, it says, those uses that are specifically authorized to be granted by special permit may be allowed by the planning board.
Right, that needs to be changed because that now speaks to provisions of, or powers of the zoning board back in the town code.
Oh, but doesn't the town code say that, I don't wanna get,
Yeah, we
Too far
can
into
talk
this,
about,
but
we
yeah,
can talk
okay,
about it.
okay.
The intent is to give the planning board the authority over special use permits within
the
this
form-based
form-based
code,
code, in the form-based
Based
district, yes.
District.
District.
oh, and so, and then the other thing was non-conforming uses and structures. One of the things that happens when you pass a code like this is that an awful lot of non-conformities disappear because for one thing, the code is written to address what's here, to legitimize what's already there. So you may have a lot of non-conformities now, but a lot of them will no longer be non-conforming.
Like
after
a
the code.
non-conforming setback.
Yeah, so, but there will be situations where there may be some nonconformities still, and under your current zoning, if somebody wants to expand or modify a nonconformity, they have to go to the ZBA, which is, an extra thing with hearings. So we're suggesting that, recommending that it be the development department doing administratively these expansions of nonconformities.
And I'm not sure where we are with that.
I would be concerned with that, frankly, because, as efficient as that can be, the public really does have a standing in some of this stuff.
Right,
The
and
public really needs to be able to have either a town board, a zoning board, a planning board, or ERB, some sort of board that people feel as though that they're going to get a hearing outside of the administrative boards. And
Right.
so I would be careful with some of that. I mean, I understand we should make this as efficient as possible,
I
but
don't know if this is an area where we need that efficiency, and the zoning board is a relatively efficient board. in Newcastle.
Well, you know, if you're comfortable
agree.
with having it be done by the ZBA, then.
Yeah, I think expansion and modifications of non-conforming uses and structures should be a zoning board of appeals authority. I don't see where it's specific to the form-based code.
Well, I think-
I would need to have more understanding of instances where you're envisioning that in order to be convinced that that is something that should be done administratively.
Okay.
Okay. Parking. You're up.
30 minutes, thank you. So, obviously, parking is something that you can't live with, can't live without it, right? There's not enough parking now, and then we're also hearing we can't do new development in downtown Chappaqua because we can't find parking. So basically what we're trying to do is require new development that can afford to provide the parking that they can, but also acknowledge that there are a lot of buildings in town that small individual property owners might be able to do something with this new code. So we're looking at a bunch of ways to accommodate both. Just running down through this, we have a provision in here for affordable or workforce housing, which would be for studios, it'd be a quarter parking space per unit for.
Quarter or is it 0.75?
0.75, I'm sorry, 0.75 per unit, and one for 1 or 2 bedrooms. Specifically for property owners who would like, in the study area, who would like to expand their existing buildings, the first 3,000 feet would come without a requirement for parking. So there's a real incentive. If you can't do it now because you have to provide parking and you have room out the back, you could push it out the back or some other way, the first 3,000 would be without a requirement for parking. Similarly, if you have a 1-story, you want to add a couple of floors above it, you could add the first floor dwelling units would be, you get a 50% exemption on your parking requirement. So if it was 1 per unit, let's say you'd only have to provide 2 spaces. This is as a start of a conversation. I'm sure this is something that you guys are interested in, what the exact number is. We picked these numbers because we felt that they were at least in the ballpark and meaningful to the owners downtown.
Where did you, what was the village or city or town that you sort of use these numbers and use them as a basis? What I'm driving at is it would be something that you derive from, say, southern Westchester as opposed to northern Westchester?
I would say it was southern Westchester and Virginia.
That's very southern Westchester.
Yes. So it's kind of a little bit of a back and forth between the team as to where this was. This isn't where we started on it.
Yeah. My sense on this is, and going back to one of the very first things that we talked about with this whole project, sort of the vision, we are creating zoning here to permit, different kinds of housing and more housing.
Yep.
But at the same token, it seems to me that there are certain reasons why people will be attracted to come here and live here. Mm-hmm. And one of the most important is not just to be here and be in town, but to be here perhaps for one of the most important things is the schools.
Absolutely.
And the schools around here require, except for the Bell School, if you're in town, you gotta travel.
Yep.
And it's hard to imagine, in my view, that these are realistic in terms of the needs of cars. And I work in Pleasantville. What Pleasantville has done, of course, with all new development is making them build underground parking for all the units.
Yeah.
And substantial. And I think the ratios are probably a little bit greater than these.
Mm-hmm. You're looking specifically at what, the residential numbers?
Yes.
Okay, so you're looking at like rental,
Yep.
right? 2-bedroom, 1.4 spaces per dwelling unit?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that works out to an average, I can't remember now. On a typical mix, it's probably about 1.25 or something like that, 1.3, let's say. Your current code is not that different, it's a
But the current
little
code is
bit
1
higher.
plus quarter per bedroom, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alright,
So these are,
1 and a third.
these are I think
It's a
trying to
third.
give a recognition that you're next to transit, right? Recognition that you're here in the downtown area, but still be realistic,
Right.
right? This is still the suburbs.
Yep.
Right, you can't walk everywhere. So that's, I'm speaking for you, but.
Yeah. And we
And I'm
have,
not saying that's wrong, I think it's important to really look at those numbers and suppositions really carefully up here.
I agree, right? And we also need to look at them in context, because there's a little bit more information coming here, and we're looking for these specifically, we're looking at existing uses that are expanding in the downtown. I think this committee has recognized that it's been somewhat of a hardship for these property owners to do anything, and it's driven by parking, and this is a way to incentivize, encourage, alleviate, you pick the word, and using the right number so that it allows people to put money into their properties and maintain them and revitalize Chappaqua, but it doesn't overwhelm the downtown area in the process. We're trying to find the right balance there. Shared parking will be permitted basically between various uses that have different peak times. If you have a neighbor who has a property and they have parking and they can demonstrate that through various seasons of the year they've got excess demand, then you can present a study along with your application to the Department of Development, and they would say, okay, he's got 20 spaces but he only needs 16 on a regular basis. You've got 4 spaces there, you can do a license agreement with your neighbor that he can get 4 spaces and he only needs 4 spaces for his 4 rental units. Then there's a mechanism for somebody to leverage something that's already there and not being used. But it has to be demonstrated to be there. We're not giving away the shop. If going forward we can demonstrate that there's a lot more Uber and ride hail, and so people are not owning as many cars, so you could do a study. There could be some development that comes along a couple of years from now that has, again, 10 parking spaces. The code required 10. They only need 8. It doesn't make sense for them to try and rent out 2 spaces. You do a study and you show that a lot of his tenants use ride hail, and so that's why they're not parking. Then I can go along and say, well, look, if this building only needs 8 parking spaces, so that's 0.8. So I should only have to provide 0.8, and I can do my development based on the data that suggests 0.8 is okay. So it's a.
But would that be done afterwards?
So that if I'm coming along and I want to develop my property,
Right.
and I see somebody who came before me and did something similar, but they had a higher parking requirement than I can do, but they don't need it, I can present that as Exhibit A.
Okay.
This is why I don't have to do
So
one
it's a
for
little
one.
bit after the fact.
Yes.
It's leveraging someone else's experience.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But to get to your comment before, item number 5, if a developer starts thinking about that way before he comes in to meet with the town,
I don't know
he
how
could
it
get a
helps.
big jump on that.
Perhaps,
Whereas if
yeah.
he waits to start that conversation after he meets with the town, well, then you might be waiting around for a while to
Well,
prove you
and
do it.
again, there's a penalty if you're first in.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you right now, our parking district, if somebody, you know, on Greeley, we had a couple new apartments go in and it was like 15, 14 parking spaces. They're in the parking district from years back. They don't need to provide those 14 parking spaces. You know, it's just assume that there is parking. This gives us a better sense of what parking is out there to be had if you cannot develop it on your site.
How will we do that, right? Because that's my big question is, how much of the downtown is a part of the parking districts, and how many spaces are available
Right.
to be used
It's good to know.
by those properties that have that right, right? We talked about that, right? So,
Are we envisioning expanding the current parking district?
No, we're envisioning sunsetting and stopping the current parking district
Really?
based on today.
So the way that, I think the way the language we have discussed is that if you have an existing property and you're just keeping it as it is, you still have your vested rights to not having to provide parking for those. But if you wanna go and do more, then you gotta fall in line with the code like everybody else.
well, but how does that account for the existing parking lots with the existing number of spaces they have?
That's a separate issue, and one of the things that we've been talking to Sabrina about is depending on how much we think this new code is going to lean on the existing parking
We needed
inventory.
to at least present it to you,
We need to do a survey and give
Yeah.
you those numbers.
Right.
yes.
Because if there's a building, just to say it, there's a building, we looked at quickly, where 2 stories, the existing was commercial both floors, that parking requirement was, for the 2nd story being commercial, significant. Proposal with the new zoning would have been 1-story commercial, 3 stories of residential, that parking requirement is actually less than the 2 stories of commercial. But then that them coming in for an application, how do they document, what they can do and what they can't do, right? it's less, so hey, that sounds great, but what are you
Right, no.
proving? Or what if they needed 2 more spaces?
So-
Are they
Will this be
grandfathered?
in the EIS? Is this something that Bonnie will be
Yeah,
studying in
that's
terms
what-
of a worst case?
Yeah, Johnny and Bonnie are working together.
Johnny and Bonnie.
John and Bonnie. Well, and that is an exact issue.
Yeah.
Okay, because we really need to understand the existing situation in relation to the uses. The planning board has approved projects without understanding what parking is available, but they're in the parking
But they're in the
district.
parking district, so they're grandfathered.
Right,
So it's
right, so they're
Right.
grandfathers, but we've asked them to show I've asked them for the planning board's information to show the difference between the uses
Yeah.
and what is the parking needed now versus previously.
Yeah, okay.
We need to really look at that in relation to actual physical parking spaces. And that's what additional work that needs to be done.
Are you serious about sunsetting the
We
parking
don't,
district?
we don't know. We
Okay.
don't know.
what
Again,
would happen?
we need to explore that.
What would happen? Cause the properties are individually owned still, right?
Yep.
So there's a commonly operated parking lot
Yep.
across
Sorry,
all these individual.
Who's the we that we need to explore this? Who's
Right now is part of the GEIS.
Okay, so us.
We, us, yes.
Okay.
I can't answer for you whether or not you wanna sunset the parking district, but in order to provide recommendations on how it should be handled, we need more information. So the parking utilization is something that I'm gonna get a proposal on, cause we didn't account for that when we started this. And we really need to understand our parking space, number of parking spaces.
But if we have a great project and we could only meet, say, 50% of the parking, what happens?
It's not a great
Then
project.
it's not a great project.
It's not a great project.
Exactly.
It's
Well,
potentially a great
Great
project.
And it's otherwise conforming to the code.
Right.
That's what I.
Well, we'll get,
So
guess
is there-
what, it
Is there
doesn't,
a
you
parking
can't park
fund
it.
that,
So-
you
so-
know,
And what's-
developers
Well,
can put
it-
money towards?
I
Well,
think though
it-
there's some more bullet points we can get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, keep going.
Maybe we should
Aha.
do that.
Great.
I did
Always
my
read the
homework.
instructions
I
at
haven't
some
got
point.
notes.
Alright,
We have
keep going.
15 more minutes of his 30 minutes, right?
Go.
So just a quick differentiation between 5 and 6. 5 is a leverage of existing spaces, so that I'm going to comply with the code, but use some of the spaces in my neighbour through a license agreement or something like that.
Probably won't.
6 is I'm going to provide less parking than is required by the form-based code because I've demonstrated to the Department of Development that I don't need as much. 7, off-site parking will be permitted within a quarter of a mile, right? So, again, this is a number that we started off with, we have to talk to you guys about it, and you've got different uses, you've got residential, I think we put in that was only for commercial, not for residential, right? Eric?
I can't remember.
Okay, we'll have to look. So that.
And is that referencing some agreement,
No.
one property owner with another one
Well,
that says
it
as long as
could
they're
be,
within
it could
13?
be, actually, either you own it or you have a right to use it as long as your property is in use. I mean, it can't be something that somebody down the road sells and then you don't have parking anymore.
Or you could own both
Right.
properties, right? You could say, I own this parcel and I own this parcel. I'm gonna develop this parcel, but I'm gonna put the parking on this other parcel.
That's it.
Is that a realistic number that you've used before, a quarter mile?
Yeah, that's a 5 to 6 minute walk.
That is a 5 to 6 minute walk, that's correct.
And that's-
So-
It's a- yeah,
standard.
that's totally realistic.
Okay.
In this setting. If you were buying a
Nice
single
day.
family home out
Nice
in the
day,
sticks, it's a
no
different
rain,
story.
so-
We have suggested that you modify the town's regulations to permit on-street parking in the hamlet. Obviously, you could put provisions in that snow emergencies, the street has to be cleared. But the point is, you've got overnight parking there that you're not allowed to use now. You want to put residential in, and residential peaks overnight, so you might as well allow people to use it.
3 hours.
I have it where I live, it works great. You know, you have days when it's not so good, but 360 days of the year, it's great, and, otherwise you wouldn't have that.
Would the private aspect of number 9 be number 5?
Overnight parking in existing municipal lots.
If it was private lots.
if it was private lots, I
Like,
don't
could
think-
you work out a deal with, let's say there's an office building
Yes.
that doesn't,
Right.
right? Would that be number
Yeah.
5?
Yes,
Okay, that would be number 5?
yes, but,
Okay.
yeah, it would be, probably would be a portion of your parking, so let's say you're doing residential.
Exactly.
Somebody's gonna be home in the middle of the day, right?
Right.
So let's say 50% are home and 50% are not. So if you could say, if you could show to the development department, I'm gonna provide 50% of my parking here and 50% on site, and it's not gonna be assigned, so that when I come home, if I come home late, I know I'm not gonna get a spot here, I'll just go to the,
The other lot?
yes,
And then you work out a deal with the private landowner?
yes. But it has to be a long-term agreement because,
Agreed.
right? And it
And
has
with
to be-
public access and easements, I know there's a whole,
There's a lot of technical.
there's a lot of dealing that
Yes,
has to
yeah.
happen. But if it lets you not build 200 parking spaces, that's got a
I
value
mean,
to it.
if you look at parking, right, if you've got 100 parking spaces and you look, even a commuter lot, right, your commuter lot, I drove
I
by
have
it out there
1,300
today,
spots.
it is full to the brim, right?
Right.
But it's probably only 35% used because it's really only full from 8 o'clock to 6 p.m., which means
Right.
it's empty
Yeah.
from 6 p.m. to 8 a.m.,
Right.
right? So
So
what
as
you wanna
long
do
as
is
you're
you
out
look
by,
around at the various
by
parking spaces and
7:30,
say,
you're fine.
when do I, and you're never gonna be 100% efficient, but you can definitely improve on 35%.
Agreed.
Weekends, completely empty.
Yep.
Holidays,
Yeah.
empty.
I think we looked into this and overnight parking is currently not permitted in the municipal lots.
So, it's not permitted in South Greeley because of refuse collection. Because the garbage trucks come in early, and they have to be able to, open the doors and sort of maneuver, but we could certainly manipulate that.
Could there be parts of that lot?
Yeah, so definitely just certain sections where the trucks have to come in
Yep.
and maneuver.
Yep.
We've tried to discourage overnight parking in the large commuter lots because people leave their cars there for the season, literally. And so when we have a big snowstorm, I end up losing, for every spot, I lose 4.
Yeah.
Well, actually 5, the 4 surrounding it, because my snowplow can't get that close.
Yep.
So we've actually prohibited that because of the snow clearing. But again,
You don't have tow trucks in Chappaqua?
no, but maybe we,
Yeah.
we have designated
Right out.
overnight
Subject to a
parking
public
areas
hearing.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so the other thing you can do is you can sort of do designated and it could be permit so that I can park overnight, but I've got to be gone by 9 o'clock.
Right,
Because
or
the-
if
the
there's a
lot-
snow emergency, you've
Oh,
gotta move your
right,
car so that I
right.
can
Yeah.
take and clear out of it.
Or get
But
towed.
that's why, yeah,
Or get towed.
I mean, or get towed. The bottom line is,
I have
look,
to shovel you out to tow you though.
to make use of this parking, it's gonna require a little more effort on the part of everybody because nothing comes
No, no,
for
no.
free.
Understood, yeah, but that's why it's instituted, and it's very recent that we've done it, and it was actually because we were losing so many spots to, failure to be able to clear that,
Yeah.
my commuters were complaining that, half
Well,
the
no,
lot
you
is-
certainly don't want that,
No, no.
right? But the idea is to look into a mechanism that
No.
would prevent it, and if you get your car towed once, it's unlikely you're gonna get towed twice.
Probably not, right?
Right? So that's the overnight parking. So it can count towards your required parking. We put a 20% number in there because you're not gonna necessarily get all of it in there, and that's in the existing lots, in the existing municipal lots. We have a fee in lieu thing at the bottom, which I'll get to. On-street parking directly in front of your use may count. So if I've got a 50-foot long frontage, I can count probably 2 spaces towards my parking requirement. And typically you're gonna need that mostly overnight, but it gives you a break to the existing property owners. Daytime existing municipal lot parking permitted if there are sufficient spaces. Well, that will depend. I'm thinking mostly of the joint parking area behind Greeley, between the Bell School and the east side
Right,
of
South Greeley parking lot,
South
yeah,
Greeley
yeah.
parking lot.
So
Or
it's
if you
3
decide,
hour
or if you
parking.
decided to build a garage in the future, something like that. It's just saying it's permitted.
Off-site within 1 mile if you provide a shuttle. So you have a shuttle back and forth. I'm not, frankly, you're gonna have a big project to provide a shuttle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Although we have the electric shuttle.
We do, it's just where would you put the parking?
Where is it?
I'm more challenged, really? It's around.
I haven't seen it.
And then the final provision is a
You don't
fee
take
in
my
lieu
senior trips.
for the right to
Put
park
it
in
out.
new municipal lots. So if the town ever decides to go ahead and build a structured parking right behind us here, you could have fee in lieu that could help contribute to the funds to build that, and then they have the right to
Absolutely.
park in it.
Well, I should clarify that the way it's written right now in the code, is that you can do fee in lieu only if the parking is actually built.
Built or
And we
what does
wanna
that mean?
keep
Does
that.
it
We-
mean planned?
I mean, it's existing.
Right, we can't accept money for parking that we can't provide.
Fair enough.
Not fun at
Well, it's
all.
not a good idea. I'm not gonna say we can't, it's not a
He
good
was like,
idea.
I have no
that
problem.
works, wait a minute,
Well, so my only objection to that is that I see the North Greeley lot as a prime place to build structured parking. And the development that results from this being the opportunity to create the funding for that. So I would think it would be a missed opportunity to let this go forward, and then there's no mechanism for anybody who's building those new dwelling units to be able to help create the funding for
Offset the
a new structured parking.
Yeah, I mean, all kidding aside, if you can
Susan
actually.
Lawrence,
And Alan
the
Bliss
spot,
too.
the lot across from Susan Lawrence, or?
Correct.
Yeah.
Alright, and so that, well,
You don't
that
want that for
discussion,
parking?
well,
What's that?
You'd only want that prime real estate for parking?
Well, if there's an alternative, then.
well, and so here's the thing, I don't think we should, I think it's good to have that in there as the ability to do such, but I think there's much larger discussions to be had by the town to identify where structured parking should go,
Oh, sure.
or could go.
And yet not solve it in this.
Yeah, well, there's no way we can possibly solve it in this.
I think you're adopting the zoning that creates the additional development capacity,
But you can't.
the parking that
We
can
will,
goes
if
with
we're
it.
gonna
go
hold
with it.
up with it,
Seems like
that's
the
gonna be a
natural-
month. I feel that
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is going
you
to
and I
be a
talked about
very
this.
long process.
Yeah, I think what this does is makes it permissible, right? It makes it permissible to use all these other kind of solutions. The actual act of saying, are we gonna build a garage or not, is a separate from the zoning. This simply makes it possible to use that.
Right, well, we don't know what the answer is yet, because we don't have the study, but some of us probably suspect that, the parking is going to be a significant constraint on what is permissible and what is realistically permittable. So it really is something that needs to be looked at, and what I'm suggesting before was that if we, to your point, and we're developing this stuff, we're enabling this, it seems to me that there ought to be some sort of mechanism whereby globally we say, look, we're gonna solve this parking situation, and developers have the option at this point, even before it's built, that we say, we're going to designate these funds for the parking exclusively, can't use it, not general funds or anything else. It's segregated so that we are putting together this pot that we will need to.
Kinda like we never did
Because otherwise, I
in
don't
the
think,
beginning with this parking lot.
if we don't
which
do
is-
that, I don't think
right.
we're ever gonna get there to the point where you guys can
Yeah.
develop to
I don't
what you
think
need
so
to.
either.
It's not gonna work.
I don't think so.
Well, the big
Well, and
question, the big
especially
question.
for the smaller parcels, I would think,
Right,
as opposed
because they can't accommodate
So can then I suggest, because, I'm sitting here going, what is our need? We already know we have a 1,300 space need, or a portion of 1,300 spaces that will be the first floor of a structure if we were to put it on the municipal lands. If we're to put it on North Greeley, how many parking spaces are there? The premise of this was no net loss in existing parking, surface parking. Okay, so that's where we started. The parking utilization study, I think, even becomes even more critical, because then we understand how many of our existing parking spaces we are using and during what timeframes we are using those parking spaces. I hear what everybody is saying. I think that understanding where it could go is important, and there needs to be a commitment to choosing one of the places it could go and building it. However, those processes, I think, are much longer than this time frame.
Right.
And we thought that as long as we allow it to be permissive, exactly what Eric said, the next step, as we've talked, is really looking at that parking structure. Because we do know it will affect the extent of redevelopment, as well as stormwater and traffic circulation. Okay, so those are things that I think we need to get further along the lines in understanding, along with this GEIS and the max build out, to understand, do we need a 2-story garage structure, or we need a 3 or 4 or 5-story structure?
And where?
And where? Where? I don't know that we wanna put a 5-story structure on North Greeley in the town lot. You know, I don't think it gives us enough spaces.
But maybe on the other side of the street on North Greeley, further down, backing the railroad tracks or some of the areas back there.
Or maybe the southern commuter lot.
Well, but can't we bifurcate the discussion about 1,300 parking spots in the train station lot from the smaller discussion, which is meant to just.
We will, and those numbers will be provided through the GEIS, absolutely.
And could you say there's almost 3 structures, right? There's a structure to deal with North Greeley, if there's a structure there. There's a structure to deal with the 1,300 cars for the train station, and then there's a structure to deal with the new development that you're gonna have to park.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe the town's taking on one, but a private developer might be taking on the other 2.
Yep.
Or there might be a private public partnership where the town and the big developer is doing it together. And the little developer's on his own, and then maybe the town's doing the little one up the street. So I think you're right, there's a lot of parking conversations, and
Yeah.
if you tie it into this, we're not gonna make that deadline.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, yeah.
my concern.
Correct, that's true.
Well, so again, we're focused on that one, the one block that we were just looking at, right? So most of those lots are individually owned.
Correct.
So there's no, in my belief, there's no reality to what we're showing could happen there without a further
Absolutely.
solution of parking. So it's like-
Absolutely, and that is
It's like we're parading this beautiful
Yeah, no,
image
it's not
of
gonna come
something
to
that
that.
should happen.
So I would respectfully disagree a little bit,
Okay.
right? So we do this parking survey to identify what parking there is. Ostensibly, I think the most likely, the issue is parking that's holding things up. The most likely development to happen on those individual properties would be residential, right? This code will, A, allow them to count the spaces in front of their property, B, give individual property owners a two or three development unit exemption credit, and B, it could allow them to park the remaining 20% overnight in the municipal lots. So I think that there's the potential, because right now I think one of the critical issues, apart from the parking, which they have if they're parking part of the business parking district, they have an exemption on, is the height restriction, right? So if you take the height restriction away, now maybe I can put 6 units in, I'm required to provide 6 spaces, I can get 2 in front, I get an exemption from 2, and I can park 2 down in the municipal parking lot, so now I can do it.
So it's
Right,
first
so-
come, first serve on the 1,300 spots for overnight? Is that what you're saying?
No. No.
Just,
I don't have the answer for that yet, because I don't know really what the numbers
What
are.
the numbers are, yeah.
But I understand where you're coming from, but I do think that we're definitely trying to provide the means and the incentive for the individual property owners.
And I'm gonna say something right now, under the existing code, they can't do anything with the property, right?
Totally understood.
Right.
We're
So
parading
we're-
a whole new thing.
Yeah,
that
we are,
is,
but
so-
but the code in and of itself
Yeah.
isn't gonna say you can now develop your property. There are other decisions that the town will need to make that will allow the flexibility unless you can be creative with your parking.
Well, and so they'll come to me first, right? Not parading myself or anything, but just say, all right, what can I do?
Yep.
All right, well, from my reaction at the moment, you can't do anything.
Correct.
You just adopted this zoning, but
So-
you can't do anything.
Yep.
And-
No,
But
that's
there
not
are
true.
property
He just
owners
gave you a
that will.
scenario where if you had 6 units, you only have to provide 2. Your
Yeah.
biggest problem is gonna be renting it because someone's gonna go, oh, I gotta walk over there to get to my parking spot.
Right.
That's the bigger problem.
Right, and I can tell you that in lots of the more inner village towns in Westchester, people park on the main streets and they have to walk 200 feet to they don't have any spots, and they have to walk 200 feet to their car. And it brings the rent down because you don't have the luxury of having a parking space,
Still
but
a
those
spot.
apartments are rented,
yeah.
you know? And really, it comes to what the financials are on it.
But
And
what,
it's
but
the
what I
walkability.
said, first come, first serve, so if there's 1,300 spots, if I do, say, 8 units, and I require an additional 4 spots.
Yep.
I can take that off and I can say, well, I'm gonna put them in the
No,
lot?
you can't, because you're gonna need town approval to park in the lot.
Well, so you're
Overnight.
not,
Until we get a handle, right now there's no parking overnight.
Yeah.
okay? Until we get a handle on this parking situation, which I promise you is soon to
but-
follow, because we need to address it.
Yeah.
Okay, but we cannot address it through this process. But until the town makes some decisions, then we won't understand how many spaces are available to provide to
But Sabrina,
the downtown.
I respectfully disagree with you on that one, to the
John's
extent that,
saying.
we finish the DGIS process, we say, look, you've got 1,300 spaces, however many spaces down here in this,
First come, first
the
served.
south garage. Overnight, there's nobody there, practically nobody there.
That's true.
I come in, I'm an individual parcel holder somewhere in the downtown area, I wanna put in 8 units of residential,
Yeah.
right? The code says, let's say they're all 1 bedroom, the requirement is 1 for 1, okay, I have to provide 8 parking spaces. But I get some credit, we have to decide the number, let's say it's 2. I get 2 credits because I'm an existing downtown building. I've got 2 spots in front of my thing, there's 2 gone. Now I have to provide 4 more, I don't have any room on site. I can say that, well, during the day, 4 of my people are gone, and 4 of my people are here. So I have the credited 2, I have the 2 in front, and then I get 4 of the 1,300. But there's so many down there at night, I can get it, right?
But night ends early here.
So yes, so the bottom line is
Neighbors are there
that's
early.
that's going to,
We have to look at that.
in principle you can do it,
Okay.
right? But the issue is it's going to put pressure on parking. It's definitely going to put pressure on parking.
And we need to be, as a town, able to process that
Yeah,
Police it.
that's it.
and police it. And we are not ready, as soon as we adopt this code, to say, you get 2 spaces, or you get 4 spaces. But I promise you, this effort will instigate a more,
But that's why I think it should be first come, first serve, as developers come into the town.
Well, that's true, but you still need to have some mechanism where you're tracking it, right?
Yeah, you can't.
Well, right,
Yeah.
right, you
How
have to
many do you
track
have to
it,
give away and.
Right.
Right.
And it may be
Giving
first
away
come,
is
first
not-
serve, who knows?
Who
And we
knows?
may be able to
Maybe.
accommodate everyone.
And maybe you're-
1,300
exactly.
spots.
right, I'm waiting for Bonnie to tell me, how many
How many
parking
spots
spaces
was
do
it
we
doing?
have?
Yeah, we have to
What-
let,
How many can we give away?
yeah, it's how many
And it's gotta get tracked.
And,
And that's what the GEIS will help identify.
and you ought to monetize it.
I think we
It
absolutely.
shouldn't be given away
Yeah, it
for
should be
free.
free parking.
And you're right,
Valet.
it shouldn't be given, I think
Oh,
there should be a
yeah.
fund.
There should
be a fee.
Right,
It should
and
be a
whatever
fee.
fee we charge.
The fee goes to
towards
13.
Yeah.
Another.
A garage,
Yes.
infrastructure.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Approved?
I,
Okay, we approved it.
hang on, are people still on the phone?
Somebody signed off.
Jeremy did, we had to,
Sorry.
Could he see the charts and the pictures?
I don't know, I assume.
So we have, by the way, the
That whole day
parking,
job thing.
the recommended parking requirements are in there on the left, and they do reflect pretty much what we talked about the last time, but that it's a lesser parking requirement than your code currently provides, because some people will avail of the train, some people will ride hail and Uber, some people will walk around. It's still nothing, I know you need a car to live in Chappaqua, but it is a reduced amount over what your code
We
currently
realize that
requires.
these are parking minimums, right? We're not setting maximums, because in reality, if a developer comes in and says, I'm gonna do 100 units, my market, there's no way, no how that I can only provide 1.5, I'm gonna need to provide 2. Well, they can provide 2, right?
Would you guys be willing to entertain adjusting on your restaurant? Are you doing that on a gross square footage? Or can a restaurant guy get a credit for kitchen and storage and all
So
that?
that's a really good question, right? And
Because that
all-
clobbers them.
But well, so restaurants are really hard because they're very people intensive at that particular time. They can also be good from a shared parking perspective, because typically you go to a
Yes.
restaurant when people are not at work, right?
Agreed.
It's from like 5 o'clock on, right? Unless you've got some booming lunch business, which then typically it's either you're in town and people just love to walk to you, right? Or you've got some conference lunch sort of business and people come for meetings sort of thing, which I think you would require parking. So, can you repeat the question of?
It's just that on a gross square footage
Yes,
basis,
yes.
you get a really big
So it
parking.
depends on, that gross square footage, that number is based on gross square footage. So some proportion of kitchen area is baked into that. If I was just to look at the least square footage, that would be closer to 20.
Oh, I was trying to get you to
Go down.
do 5
Yeah.
per thousand for gross or 10
so
for net.
if I was gonna come in with a restaurant, what I would do, the first thing I'd do is I'd go to Sabrina and say, listen, I want a shared parking that wazoo out of this thing. Right? It's gonna be a quality restaurant, my people are gonna be there Thursday, Friday evening, right? Yeah, I'll be open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but I'll have a handful of people. And I'm gonna have valet, and this is where I'm gonna valet to, and da, da, da,
So
da, da.
you can pick at it.
Yeah.
As long as there's a way to work with that, with the department, because that'd be the one thing that I would see spooking a restaurant guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
If
a
he has to
challenge.
put in 50 spots,
Yeah.
it's like, wow.
Well, but no,
So
but,
you need
but
to
you can
provide
do,
the flexibility and the
you
language.
do
And if I don't
shared
get
parking.
credit for 2 at my front door, I still got 40
Yeah,
more to go.
exactly,
Okay.
yes. But that's the purpose of particularly shared parking for restaurants. And valet, we put valet in there.
Right,
also.
and valet, I know you can pack them in and.
You can
stuff.
pack them in, or you can drive them if there's a nearby municipal lot down the street that you have permission to use.
That's good.
Right? I mean, the bottom line is you have,
to get each car.
you have to identify when you have parking, both public and private, right, that's not being used, and use it. Right, you match your development to your parking, and if you can build more parking, you know, nobody's gonna stop you. But to the extent that you can leverage what's there that's not being used to encourage sustainable development, do it.
And as we do this, I think somehow, some way, it has to be anticipated the nature of what you're gonna see in terms of development, to try to plan in terms of what the worst case is going to be. If we're planning on having nothing but restaurants, then that's X. If it's gonna be other kinds of retail, then it's gonna be Y. So I don't know how you do that, but it seems to be.
That's-
I mean, we've
you've
been
gotta look at
seeing
that.
50 to 60% of as food based
Yeah.
is what's happening
Yes,
in
that's what it
downtowns.
typically is, yeah.
They're really becoming food because people
Right.
want to experience something because they're all shopping online now.
Exactly.
Right.
But whatever that trend is, my point is also those trends change,
Yes, that's true.
as we've seen.
That's true.
So I don't know how you anticipate that in terms of do your worst case scenario, because worst case scenarios change all the
Well, so
all the
the
time.
good news is, you know, you look forward, you try and do an average in the worst case scenario, and nothing's ever 100% right.
Right.
So this is gonna be up a little bit, that'll be down a little bit, and the more diversity you build in, it's all kind of gonna even
Makes
it
sense.
out. I think that's it for me, right?
Okay.
That wasn't a bad conversation, so.
I have
Not at all.
I have to catch a flight soon.
Okay.
But to go to the code testing results, we think it's very valuable to have somebody actually pretend that they're working for a developer, do a proposal for a design, and kind of test the code. And so what we did is we said, that same block that we've been looking at, can you develop something? And so they developed a scheme that has a parking deck in the back, which has a speed ramp, it has one-way angle parking, it has buildings here that are ground floor, second floor, third floor, really only gets to 4 here. In reality, I think you could actually, when we showed it, you could get more density than this. But I think what's important here is really when they came back and they showed the massing. So one of the very specific comments that we had that we were trying to address with the upper floor frontage occupancy is trying to make sure that we didn't get that solid wall. So because of the specifics of this block, the code is written so that you can't actually use your corners, right, at an intersection for a void, right? You gotta have building there. But this is a block that doesn't really have a corner because it actually bends here, right? So in reality, that requirement doesn't address that. So what they did is they used this end of the block as part of their permitted void to meet the frontage occupancy. And so what that means is you actually ended up with continuous building. So it didn't work, right? So I think it's actually pretty easily addressed because what we can do is change the language to say that the frontage occupancy isn't actually based on the length of the block. It's actually based on the length of the building itself. So if that had been the requirement, you would have had a building from here to here, in which case this wouldn't be permitted. On the upper floors, you would have to actually come in, step back from there to meet that frontage occupancy requirement. That's clear as mud, does that make sense?
Yeah, I have to tell you that is one of the harder concepts for people to get a handle on. And that point of the canyon effect is probably one of the most important in understanding, approving the storied height along Lower King.
Yep.
Okay, so we need to think of how we can really put this into pictures and words to fully satisfy the concerns.
Yep, we agree.
Okay.
But that's kind of, and that's part of the reason we picked this block for the
Yep.
code testing, to make sure that we're getting it. So in essence, we're gonna go back and revise some of the language here to make sure that we address that.
Although I would say, I don't object to a street wall concept. I mean, again, I think of, older towns where they still have 3-story buildings along a street wall, very nice character in terms of, modulation from building to building and modulation on the roof line. So I'm not as bothered by the concept of a street wall, and would in fact find it maybe objectionable to say, oh, you can only have the, you've got to create pushbacks on the second and third floors where you're really trying to create, more of an interesting street wall. So I don't find that, I think the massing of that is objectionable because it's treating it as one building. I think if it treated it more as, breaking it up more in terms of as if it were, a collection of older buildings, you would have more street, you have more roof line configuration and maybe some in and out, every 50 feet or something like that, but, just the point saying, I'm not sure about making the second and upper floors push back significantly from the street in certain areas.
I mean, the key in my mind, when you're walking down the street, if you've got the same architecture the whole way down, my eye has gone from here to 500 feet in 5 seconds, and I'm done with that street.
Well, the code, the architecture portion of the code doesn't let you do that.
Right. If you've got, if the building is broken up so that each building, each portion of it looks considerably different than the other, then my eye goes to this, well, look at this, look at this, look at this, and so it takes me mentally, 10 times the amount of time to go down the street. It's much more interesting.
And I agree with Bill. I'm okay with the street wall.
Yeah.
I don't need a big, huge pushback on the second or third
Right.
floor. Because if you do think of just older traditional towns, you
Right.
do, it just
Right.
tasteful, breaking up the facade. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The massing, whatever, but the street wall, it's not the end of the world to me.
Yeah.
Now, I agree with Sabrina. There are some people who are very concerned about a canyon effect, and we could address that through architecture
Yeah.
and ornamentation and setbacks and varying
Right.
heights.
And you can be very specific on the specific street on Lower King
Yeah.
to require that, just on that little area.
Right.
And, there's a building in White Plains at, where the Target center is, the Capelli Trump building. There's a point where there is a 33-story tower, a 6-story loft building, and a bridge, and then it's open to the street. And I think the section from the 33-story tower to the 6-story building is 64 feet.
Yeah.
And when you stand in there, you don't feel the 33-story building. So I think that would be like a canyon, but you don't even feel it, so.
Right, but I also think
People have to go to these spaces first.
There is space in between.
Mhm.
The concern isn't so much about one side of Lower King, it's the both sides of Lower King.
Well, this is a 6-story and a 33.
No, I understand that, but you also, that street, if I'm thinking of the same area, it's wider there.
No, it's not, it's a
It's a courtyard,
It's
but
a
the-
courtyard,
right, but that
or for
court-
Martine.
Right, that courtyard though, I think
I
is,
think it's 64 feet across.
is it, I don't know what the width of King is.
Oh, I don't know what
It's
the
not
deal is.
60.
But the
It's
point,
not
the
60,
point I'm trying to
that's the
get to
problem,
is that the point I'm trying to get to is I think, let's just be careful with our words. 4 or 5 stories really isn't a canyon. So I just wanna be mindful of the words we use,
Right,
that's all.
I appreciate your comments, there are people on the committee who are drastically opposite of your opinion.
Yes.
Again, I think the explanation and explaining the architectural detailing, the percentages in a meaningful manner so that everyone can be on the same page.
And I think that's what's gonna keep the buildings lower.
Yeah,
And the parking and the sewer and the stormwater are all gonna keep the buildings lower.
Yeah, there's a reason where there is comfort in understanding
They're
the
good to go.
streamlined approval process because of the GEIS. Outside of that GEIS, it is the same approval process we have today.
Right.
It is that GEIS, no pressure, that will help set the framework for this to occur.
And it probably makes that hurdle even higher if you wanna go over
Yeah,
the umbrella.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So the one thing I would point out is this massing doesn't actually comply with the code, right? The code does actually require that you make it look like multiple kind of pieces. But again, I think that it is appropriate in some places. So the only places I think that, if I remember correctly, where we were requiring this was in essence this street. It was not on this street, and I think there's only one other place. We're
was
really
just-
looking at places
just on
where
that
you're,
one side?
you're looking at places where it's building to building, which actually aren't that many places here in Chappaqua. The other comment we had heard was about 5 stories. One was making it look like the top floor, right, is more like a roof. The other we want to be clear about is that there are almost no places where 5 stories occurs across from 5 stories, right? The only places there are 5 stories are on the crescent, facing the train station, facing the park, right? It's always in relation to some open space. I think there's only one place, which is the connection from where the gas station is to the train station, to where the Crescent Green would be, right? Very, very short segment there, where you might get 2 5-story pieces, but it's very short. So there really isn't a place where it's like
4
long,
stories.
5-story, kind of stuff.
Lower King is 4 stories. No, wait a minute. Yeah, it's 4 stories.
Yeah.
So.
This is Heidi. Sorry, I dialed in. Can you repeat that Lower King? I thought, as we were looking at it today, I thought it was depicted as being 5 stories.
It's 4 stories.
4 stories.
Looking at the
I
regulating
was under
plan.
that mistaken impression as well. I'm wondering.
Well, wait a minute.
No, hold on, let's look at the color map.
It was in the T5. It was.
Yeah.
We were
It is
looking
in the
at earlier
5,
today.
but there's a plan that has it in 4.
4, right, because
So,
I know, I thought it was 5 as well, and that was my concern when I was going through it. But when I saw today, when Eric put it up, it was 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you are, see,
Yeah.
5.
it's 5.
5.
So it's,
Ivy, can you
so
see this
here,
map?
so here it's 4 stories, right? Here it's
No.
4,
No,
here
you're-
it's
No,
4.
that's
not Lower
5.
King.
Purple, dark
No.
purple is 5.
That's 5, right? Is
Well,
that-
the 5 is the
But
zone.
you need to look at the little boxes
Oh.
with
Yeah.
the numbers.
The 2 to 4.
The 5 is its designation.
Yeah,
No,
they're
here.
2 to 4.
It is the
One
transect,
side is
it's
2
not
to
the,
5.
not the 4.
Right.
One
Because
side is 2 to 5.
you have to look at the regulating plan for the building
here.
height on a
One side
specific
is 2 to
face
5,
of the
one
block.
is 2 to 4.
I see,
It's in
so,
that 5.
I got you.
So this
It's in
is
that
2 to
5,
4,
yeah.
2 to 4, 2 to 4, 2 to 5. This is 2 to 5, this is 2 to 5. And then when you come down here, this is where you get 5, but it's 5 on a park, right? It's on a green.
But do you think there's gonna be that much difference if it's one side of Lower King is 4 and one side of Lower King is 5 versus 5 and 5? I mean, still think, you know,
that
if you're
feel?
feeling that closed-in feeling.
Well, here it's 4 and 4,
Well, yeah, but that's not Lower King, so.
where you,
So Lower
To
King,
the
No,
left.
go back
where the-
up.
where
Go
the
back up.
blue-
where,
See with the blue, to the left of
Yeah.
the blue and across the
across
way
the
there,
street.
there.
right there, that's
That's the
that
area.
dead-end little
Yeah, yeah.
narrow street.
Right.
And that's the narrowest of them, so that's.
so we had 2 to 4 and 2 to 5. We were specifically thinking about this, thinking, well, should this side of the block really be 4? But we ended up having it at 5.
Yeah.
I think maybe we wanna do that 2 to 4, keep the side facing the tracks
South
2 to
Greeley.
5,
Yeah.
and then
South
Now,
Greeley
just
could be
food for
5.
thought, if you look at that,
Yeah.
if you look at the intersection at all 4 corners,
No windows.
3 of them max out at 4, and only that one corner max out at 5, so it does stop the 4 corners all from having a plateau.
Yep.
So having one pop up might not be a bad thing,
I know,
just
but is
to-
that would that be the quadrant that you would select
That
as 5?
I just noticed that there was only, I
Right,
don't
but
know, I don't know,
also, if
but.
we look at North Greeley, where it's 2 to 4, North Greeley on that same block,
Yeah, with the blue is.
okay? Maybe do that 2 to 5 with 2 to 4 across the street, with 2 to 4 facing King Street, 2 to 4 on the opposite side of King Street, and then do 2 to 5 around the corner and 2 to 5 around the back.
I lost you, I'm sorry.
You can mark it up.
You'll mark it up, that's good.
Right, is this a 2-week comment period?
Yes.
Here we go.
By the way, I'll just say, I feel personally that I would object to 5 stories. I don't see a scenario where, especially if we're saying 16 feet or more for first floor and 10 or 11 feet for each floor after that, to get to 4 or 5 stories with those kinds of heights, those are big buildings, those are tall structures. And to say that's a 5-story where you can get that kind of height, you're talking about 70, I don't know if I'm doing my math, you're talking about 75 feet.
Right, you're 11 times 4, so you're 70 feet, yes.
Yeah, that's New York City, that's a high-rise building. 75 feet or more is a high-rise. So,
Bigger pails.
I think that the stories combined with what we're envisioning, the possible
But the power's full on the other.
floor-to-floor heights of them is big buildings. And I just personally
In
think that
addition
that's
to
not
parking, you're gonna have to put a couple
where
of
we
extra
ought to
bucks
be.
in for the extra
So
tall.
if we're thinking of those kinds of heights, then we ought to be
Yep.
thinking
Of course.
shorter in terms of stories.
How high is 91?
Chappaqua
Wait,
needs
wait,
to
wait.
be
3
with the fire
stories.
department.
No, what's your
To make
height?
sure that
35
that-
feet to the midpoint.
35 feet
I was
to the
gonna-
midpoint.
If you can see this picture, this is a development that we've seen in Maryland, new townhomes. They're 3 stories plus an occupiable 4th floor at the roof line. So that's a 4-story building. That's still a pretty high wall, right? That's a good sized street wall, probably comparable to, areas of New York City where you find that, 4-story kind of, more
Bounce house.
historic building.
Yeah.
And those are probably 10-foot first floors, maybe shorter on the upper floors, I don't know, but
I
that's
don't know, I'd
a
say that's a 50 plus 60-foot building.
street wall in terms of height, yeah, alright, so, I don't know, and in thinking about this concept of caverns, and, I would certainly be concerned about that too. So I particularly just again say, I think 5 stories is a mistake, and that it, 4 stories
Even if it's
might.
opposite
green,
an
by the
open
green.
space.
Yeah, opposite
Well,
the green space.
honestly, I think the green space, and if we're talking about, if we are talking about the walkable, livable, creating community space, we've talked about expanding the park in front of the train station. Maybe in front of the green space, the 5 stories is appropriate, but maybe on the other streets, it's the 4 max. Unless you're dealing with a certain amount of topography, given the King Street Hill and coming down by the bridge.
Right.
That makes sense to nestle in so that there's more of an equator, if you will, with that bridge and the elevation of that roadway. So I will provide you, Eric, with comments from my perspective as to where I think that we should be 5, understanding some of the concerns expressed here and the canyoning.
I think it's a very rational, reasonable thing to say 5 would only be permitted on places where there's an open space, you're across from a train track, you're, that kind of a thing.
Nestled into a roadway.
Yeah.
Right, and then other places where
Because
you're
then
building
if
the
we think-
building, it's 4 stories.
Yeah, that's
And
reasonable.
look at the
Yeah.
patterning, I wanna mention the patterning of the town when we were discussing conifer. And the elevations of conifer and having the ability to connect to that bridge. If we were to think about the other side within the train station and going on to Greeley, some type of staging of that building to bring it up to the roadway. To kind of level out that experience, perhaps, I don't know.
How many stories is coming from?
4.
4.
Yeah,
But
certainly.
but you have to understand the elevation of where conifer will be in relation to the
Right.
bridge, and the fact that you're coming down the hill where Citibank is.
So how many feet over the bridge is coming first
I
building?
don't know offhand.
2 stories. They're,
Yeah.
2 stories
right,
above
Yeah,
the
bridge is
the
bridge.
at
bridge is
their-
at the,
Is it at the,
no, it's not at the first floor.
it's at the second floor?
It's at the second
Right.
floor.
Are they wood or
Are they metal?
Metal stud,
Metal stuff?
yeah,
So the,
but you would never know, right?
well, so the 4 to 4 is 9 oaks?
No conifer.
I know, right, no, they're metal, they'll be metal studs,
So you see the 9
I'm
foot
disconnected.
floors?
sorry,
Alright,
I gotta
Only one per
Alright.
yes,
structure?
exactly.
Thank you.
So 9, 36.
don't leave your.
I'll be
lot.
leaving, Eric.
Alright, so folks, 2 weeks, 2-week comment period brings us to Wednesday, the 27th, the day before Thanksgiving. If I could receive comments by Tuesday, the 26th, you can either mark up your documents, drop them off to me, email me your comments, however you wish to communicate them to me. I will be sending on the 27th, an email to Eric, Bonnie, and John with your comments.
And
And I
when's the
will,
next meeting?
We
Safe
will
travels.
schedule,
Bye, bye, Eric.
we will circulate some emails about the next meeting.
Do you think it's in November,
month,
or
2
December?
I'm thinking December,
Okay.
December. I'd like to see what the comments are, have them understand, let's determine how much of a redraft, have them come back.
Because a lot of people are away, like,
No, and we're cognizant of the holidays, we have to discuss
Not
the
you.
GEIS and the
Considering other
description of the proposed
I
action.
don't have time to take it.
And we may end up punting that till the beginning of the year.
Anybody still on the phone?
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Alright, okay, we're breaking up, Ivy, okay? You got the dates?
I'll be still on the phone at 7 o'clock.
Okay, great, thank you guys.
Take care.
Just
Bye.
tell